Hazen was once a legendary sorcerer who lived for more than 200 years. After losing someone precious to him, he gambled everything to defy death, only to awaken years later in the body of a young boy. Now, he has joined the Imperial Army, but instead of becoming a loyal soldier, Hazen quickly discovers that the Empire is rotten from the inside. Corrupt officers abuse their soldiers, nobles exploit their power, and innocent people suffer while those in charge look the other way. So Hazen decides to play their game. He humiliates corrupt commanders, survives an assassination attempt, crushes enemy wizards, captures an entire tribe, and even begins negotiating with the very people the Empire considers its enemies. But that's only the beginning, because Hazen isn't trying to become a hero. He's planning to rise through the military ranks, gather power, control the Empire from within, and eventually devour the entire country. And with magic that no one can understand, stopping him might already be impossible. The story began with an old man who was startled and fell backward after the protagonist struck a butterfly. Somehow, the old man became frightened of the protagonist and wondered whether he was willing to kill. The protagonist denied this, explaining that he had only been killing a pest. He added that he was a soldier and also the future of the Empire, which made him responsible for punishing the corrupt people within it. The protagonist lived in the Gastro Empire, the largest and oldest state on the continent. At that time, the ceremony to appoint the new general officers was taking place, with several contestants standing in the arena before a large crowd. The host announced that first place in the general officer examination had been secured by Lizard Rigra, who was appointed to the Ministry of Defense of the Celestial Palace. Second place went to Emma, who was appointed to the Ministry of Agriculture of the Celestial Palace. In the same way, the remaining candidates were also assigned their respective positions. It almost seemed like a classroom where monitors of different sections were being elected. Emma realized that the announcement had skipped third place and recalled a conversation she had once had with a boy. She had told him in surprise that he had secured third place, as she had expected him to come first. However, the boy had replied that he was perfectly satisfied with third place. Emma felt that he simply did not want to admit his defeat. The boy then explained that there had never been a record of a commoner securing first place. He added that a person's origin did not determine everything, and what truly mattered was not where someone started, but how far they could go. Finally, the host announced that third place had been secured by Hazen, who was appointed as the Northern District Border Guard of Galna. Hazen accepted the position. After the ceremony ended, Hazen walked alongside Emma. Emma complained that the host had talked far too much, while Hazen remarked that he would have died of boredom if he had been forced to continue listening. He further commented that the Empire's appointments were filled with favoritism toward the nobility, making the entire ceremony feel shameless. Emma warned him not to say such reckless things, reminding him that they never knew who might be nearby listening. A short while later, Emma reunited with her old friend Rafa after a long time, and the two were delighted to see each other again. Hazen remarked that Rafa had arrived surprisingly quickly. Rafa explained that she had come because it was an important day for Hazen and Emma. She added that she had ridden a horse for 3 consecutive days to make it in time. Emma was surprised to hear that Rafa had ridden a horse continuously for 3 days. Hazen wondered whether Rafa had visited both the capital and the surrounding cities. Rafa confirmed that she had, adding that the difference between them was remarkable. However, she said that with Emma serving in the Ministry of Agriculture, she no longer had to worry about food. An officer agreed, stating that as a minister, Emma would not be responsible for handling minor tasks personally. Suddenly, Emma became sad because Hazen and Rafa had been assigned to the Northern District as border guards on the front line. Although there were currently no issues with the Kumin tribe, she felt upset because they would not be able to meet freely for quite some time. Rafa reassured Emma, saying that she did not need to worry because she would protect Hazen no matter what. Hazen also promised that he would return victorious as soon as possible, just like a knight who had promised his wife that he would come back alive from war. After that, a chubby boy who looked just like John Doe approached them and remarked that it was truly pathetic for a commoner to become an imperial officer only to be assigned to the Empire's most remote frontier. Even so, he sarcastically wished Hazen success in his future endeavors. Hazen did not know who the boy was, but Lisa informed him that he was Dometa, one of their classmates. Dometa praised Lisa's kindness and suggested that she should stop associating with a commoner, as it was unbecoming of a blue-blooded noble to be friends with one. He extended the same suggestion to Rafa as well. Dometa then revealed that he had been appointed to the Ministry of Commerce and offered to hire Rafa as his personal knight protector, claiming that it would be far better than serving on a dangerous and brutal battlefield. Hazen stepped forward like a hero and told Dometa to stop bothering them, pointing out that he was making Lisa feel uncomfortable. Dometa became furious upon hearing those words. Hazen then remarked that if both he and Dometa truly had feelings for Emma, Dometa should be embarrassed enough to want to disappear on the spot. He further stated that although Dometa had ranked last by a huge margin in terms of grades, he still acted arrogantly simply because he belonged to a prestigious, noble family. Hazen added that if Rifa tolerated someone like Dometa, it was only out of respect for his family and the imperial general. He went on to criticize Dometa, saying that he was not worthy of his position despite his qualifications and that he had no right to speak to them. Finally, Hazen expressed his hope that Dometa would spend the rest of his life as nothing more than a merchant, making friends only with equally pitiful nobles. He concluded by saying that it would be even better if Dometa never showed his face to them again. After that, Hazen, Emma, and Rifa left together, leaving Dometa seething with anger. Emma and Rifa could not understand why Hazen said such things that only made him create enemies. Emma then held both of their hands like a child and said that since they were about to go their separate ways, she hoped they would take good care of themselves. She added that she was not worried about Hazen. A month later, Hazen and Rifa arrived at the northern district of Garnar. Hazen was assigned the rank of sub-lieutenant and reported to the officer in charge. The officer remarked that it had been 10 years since he had last seen a commoner become an officer. He then introduced himself as Colonel Jero Magno, the commanding officer of the district. Colonel Magno welcomed Hazen and informed him that he was being assigned to the 8th platoon, which currently had a vacancy. He assured Hazen that he would provide him with all the necessary details. Hazen received a brief orientation. As part of his training, he was instructed to first familiarize himself with the members of his platoon. Colonel Magno then asked whether Hazen had any questions. Hazen replied that he had none and left to report to his assigned unit. As soon as he stepped outside, he overheard Colonel Magno and several others talking behind his back. They mocked Hazen, calling him unpleasant and saying that he would surely die soon. Some of the soldiers even felt sorry that he had been assigned to the 8th platoon. However, Magno coldly remarked that no one wanted a commoner to become an officer, especially one as outstanding as Hazen. Hazen merely smirked after overhearing their conversation and headed toward training ground number 8. When he arrived, he saw many soldiers training. Among them was a huge, overweight man sitting comfortably beside another soldier while 2 exhausted men carried them both on their backs, struggling under the heavy weight. Whenever they failed to perform properly, the overweight man lashed them with a whip. Hazen wondered whether they were playing some sort of game for food and wine, as the arrangement seemed completely unfair. Soon afterward, the overweight man and another soldier competed in a race that ended in a fight between them. When the overweight man lost, Hazen casually remarked that he had only lost because of his excessive weight, and that the first thing he should do was lose weight and stop drinking. The overweight man immediately flew into a rage and turned toward Hazen, demanding to know who he was. Hazen calmly introduced himself as the new officer in charge of the 8th platoon. Rifa stood beside him as his escort. Hazen then asked whether the man was the platoon's overseer and politely inquired about his name and rank. The man agreed that he was the overseer and introduced himself as Sergeant Chomo. He explained that the chain of command had changed frequently over the years, so the platoon had become accustomed to training on its own. Soon afterward, Chomo's eyes fell upon Rifa. He remarked that having such a beautiful woman around would make things much more interesting and invited her to join them, commenting that she had an excellent figure. Hazen simply smiled and told Rifa to deal with him. The next moment, Rifa struck Chomo down with a single blow, leaving everyone present shocked and frightened. It was as if they had witnessed a female Hulk standing before them. Hazen explained that Rifa belonged to the Zexan ethnicity and that none of them could match her physical abilities. He added that if anyone wished to lay a hand on her, they would first have to become stronger than she was. Hazen then announced that he was changing the platoon's training regimen. He ordered everyone to begin with 30 laps around the training ground. He further warned that anyone who dared to disobey his orders would be killed. He demanded that they either acknowledge his command or choose death instead. Terrified by Hazen's words, everyone immediately agreed to follow his orders. Hazen then asked how long Chomo intended to keep pretending to be unconscious. As Hazen casually moved his staff, Chomo hurriedly stepped backward, wondering what Hazen was trying to do since an officer was not supposed to use a magic staff against his own subordinate. His nose was still bleeding, and Hazen advised him to visit the infirmary. However, Hazen continued teasing him, asking whether he still considered himself a proper soldier. Hazen then pretended to swing his magic staff at him, causing Chomo to frantically dodge every strike before finally turning around and running away. After the training session, every soldier was so exhausted that they collapsed onto the ground to rest. A while later, Hazen noticed Sergeant Baz, who displayed exceptional swordsmanship and remarkable endurance. Hazen announced that beginning the next day, Baz would be in charge of the platoon's combat instruction. Baz wondered how Hazen already knew his name. Hazen replied that he had memorized the names of every member after reading the roster. Hazen then ordered that 2 servings of food and 3 glasses of wine be prepared. One of the soldiers asked whether the order was meant for everyone. Hazen replied that they should learn to manage themselves properly because maintaining their physical condition was also part of a soldier's duty. The soldiers were delighted to hear his words. However, Chomo remained furious over the humiliation he had suffered earlier. Later that night, while Hazen was sitting in his room reading a book, someone knocked on the door. The visitor introduced himself as a Dicket from the 8th Platoon and explained that the platoon had prepared a welcome party to celebrate Hazen's arrival. He had come to invite him. Hazen remarked that it did not feel as though he was actually being welcomed. Dicket replied that it was not like they wanted to become Hazen's enemies. He claimed that everything had merely been a misunderstanding and suggested that they should put it behind them by enjoying the party together and strengthening their friendship. Although Hazen understood that they were planning something, he still agreed to attend the party. Dicket thanked him but requested that Hazen leave his magic wand behind, assuring him that they would protect him if anything happened. He also asked whether Hazen did not feel safe without it. Hazen calmly placed the wand in his room and followed Dicket. Meanwhile, inside the banquet room, Chomo was arguing with Baz, questioning whether he truly intended to go through with the plan. Chomo angrily warned Baz not to grow attached to Hazen simply because he had praised him earlier. As Hazen approached, he wondered what was happening. Dicket assumed that the party had already begun and opened the door, announcing that the guest of honor had arrived. Chomo welcomed Hazen and admitted that the celebration might be a little rough, but insisted that it was a sincere gesture. He then offered Hazen a drink. Hazen suspected that the wine was poisoned. To reassure him, Chomo drank from one bottle himself and claimed that there was nothing to worry about. Hazen accepted the drink and immediately realized that the first cup had merely been a bluff. The poison had actually been mixed into the second cup. He calmly praised the quality of the wine, remarking that he had not expected to find such fine liquor in such a remote region. Chomo smugly replied that he had expected Hazen to believe the second cup contained poison and that the poison would leave him writhing in agony for at least 3 days and 3 nights. Instead of drinking further, Hazen poured wine for everyone else. The moment he did so, Chomo grew nervous because the poisoned wine had now been served to the others. None of the soldiers dared to drink it. Hazen looked around and asked why no one was drinking. He remarked that they did not need to be so reserved because the wine was not poisoned. It was the very same wine they had prepared. At that moment, Chomo realized that Hazen had discovered the entire scheme. He bitterly commented that Hazen had been far too observant and that their expressions and behavior had exposed them. He added that conspiracies required far more skill than ordinary killings. Enraged, Chomo suddenly charged at Hazen with a wine bottle. Hazen instantly cast Windcutter, killing Chomo with a single strike. The remaining soldiers were left stunned. They wondered how Hazen had been able to cast magic without a magic staff, since he had left his wand behind in his room. Hazen explained that a magic staff was not absolutely necessary to cast magic. He added that revealing all of one's abilities to others was never advisable. Baz immediately fell to his knees and apologized, explaining that Chomo had been the one who had poisoned the wine and that the rest of them had simply been too intimidated to resist his orders. Hazen replied that there was no need for any misunderstanding. He stated that Chomo had been executed for attacking a superior officer with a wine bottle. However, if the wine had truly been poisoned, everyone involved would also have been punished. He then asked Baz whether the wine had actually been poisoned. Baz denied it. Hazen handed the cup to Baz and instructed him to drink it. Baz realized that although they had all participated in the assassination attempt, they had merely been following Chomo's orders. Believing it was his just punishment, he reached for the cup. However, it suddenly slipped from his hand before he could drink. Hazen stared at him coldly and ordered him to drink it anyway. Just then, Iketu attempted to flee. Hazen immediately used magic to knock him to the ground. He declared that Chomo and Iketu had conspired to assassinate a superior officer, which was an extremely serious violation of military discipline. As for Baz, Hazen stated that he had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Baz accepted his judgment. Hazen then entrusted Baz with disposing of the bodies and informing the families of the deceased. Finally, he revealed that the wine had never actually been poisoned because he had secretly switched the cups, so Baz had nothing to fear. After wishing everyone good night, Hazen quietly left the room. As he walked away, his thoughts drifted back to nearly a decade earlier. He remembered lying before a mysterious figure who wondered whether that was truly the end of the man who had lived for over 200 years and had become the most powerful wizard in history. The figure remarked that such an ending was truly pathetic. Hazen recalled that he had lost someone incredibly important. By the time he had tried to bring that person back, it had already been too late. He understood that death was the natural law of the world, yet he had still gambled both his soul and all of his magical knowledge in defiance of fate. Even now, he still did not know whether the mysterious being before him had been a god or a demon. When he regained consciousness, he found himself reborn in the body of a young boy 3 years earlier. Now, after witnessing the corruption within the Northern District, Hazen realized that not only the high-ranking officers, but even the ordinary soldiers of the platoon were rotten to the core. To him, it was the perfect place to rise through the ranks quickly by producing results. Standing there, S resolved that this was where everything would begin. He vowed to put an end to the corruption that had consumed the nation for so long and decided that he would ultimately devour the entire country from within. A few days had already passed and Raifa was now chasing the students of the platoon during training. If she caught any of them, they had to run 2 additional laps. However, a few of them became so exhausted that they simply collapsed on the ground. One of the other boys was surprised and remarked that Baz had never missed a single day, even when Chomo had been the one in charge. Bazdu agreed and reminded everyone that a week had already passed since the wine incident. Meanwhile, Hazen met Magno, who commented that he was surprised Hazen was still alive, adding that he had expected Hazen to be killed, considering the circumstances. Hazen wondered whether he had not submitted his daily report. Magno replied that it was nothing serious, explaining that the 8th platoon was full of criminals and had always been a headache. He apologized for assigning Hazen there as a test. Magno then decided to introduce Hazen to his direct superior officer, Mospiza. Mospiza mentioned that he had heard Hazen had killed Chomo and the others on his very first day of assignment. Hazen confirmed that he had already submitted a detailed report about the incident. Mospiza became angry and remarked that Hazen had handled the situation in the wrong way, adding that a commanding officer should not lose 2 subordinates on the very first day. As he pointed a finger at Hazen, Hazen responded that according to the records, 10 commanding officers of the 8th platoon had died under suspicious circumstances. Mospiza wondered whether Hazen was implying that those deaths had also been Chomo's doing. Hazen denied making that claim and instead pointed out that 10 non-commissioned officers and lieutenants had died either on their first day or within 2 weeks of joining the platoon. He questioned what Mospiza thought about those incidents and added that if proper action had been taken after the first victim had died, the later deaths could surely have been prevented. Hazen then remarked that Mospiza was a piece of shit who had deliberately ignored the situation. He added that if Mospiza had fulfilled his responsibilities, those incidents might never have happened. Mospiza responded that Hazen was being disrespectful toward a superior officer. Hazen immediately stated that he was only presenting objective facts. He further commented that if Mospiza refused to accept Chomo's death as justified, they could request an external investigation into the matter. However, he added that such an investigation would also examine Mospiza's own actions. Magno tried to calm the situation by saying that Hazen should submit more detailed reports in the future. Just then, a soldier interrupted with an emergency report, informing them that the Kuman tribe had appeared about 3 kilometers hazen of the border, and that there were around 100 of them. Hazen already knew about the situation. The Kuman tribe frequently attacked and looted the villages at the foot of the mountains, while the Empire's expansion policy prioritized the lowlands and largely ignored the mountainous regions. Because of this, Hazen asked Magno if he could take command of the vanguard platoon, explaining that he believed it was the perfect opportunity to demonstrate his strength. Mospiza became angry and remarked that Hazen should have sought permission first. However, Magno stopped him and granted Hazen permission to lead the vanguard platoon and protect the village. Hazen, along with his team, headed toward the mountains to assess the situation. There, they found the Kuman tribe, all of whom were heavily armed. However, they had not yet attacked the village. As Hazen wondered whether there was a wizard among them, the man standing beside him, Buzz, handed him a telescope and pointed out a lizardman wearing a crown who appeared to be the tribe's leader. Hazen knew that the ability to use magic as well as the amount of magical power a person possessed depended on their bloodline. Within the empire, only nobles were capable of using magic. Therefore, the crown was likely a sign that the individual belonged to a minor noble family. Hazen then explained the plan. He stated that battles between wizards were usually fought as individual duels. Once they eliminated the enemy wizard, they would ambush and capture the remaining members of the Kuman tribe. Buzz looked confused and wondered whether Hazen was not going to wait for the main force to arrive. Hazen replied that he had no intention of waiting for people who were so slow. He added that no matter how great the enemy's magical aptitude was, they would not be able to use magic without a wand. Furthermore, they could usually cast only one spell at a time. With that, Hazen stepped forward and loudly declared that the territory already belonged to the Empire and that he would not tolerate outsiders doing as they pleased. His declaration caused a commotion among the members of the Kuman tribe. The enemy wizard immediately realized that Hazen was also a wizard. He then cast the spell Ice Axe, and Hazen recognized that the spell's power came from the staff. Hazen easily dodged the wizard's attacks and observed that although the spells were not bad, they were very simple. Now it was Hazen's turn to attack. However, the wizard suddenly rushed forward and attempted to strike him at close range. Hazen effortlessly dodged the attack and realized that the wizard used his wand not only for casting magic, but also as a melee weapon. Hazen's attention was drawn to the gem embedded in the staff. It served as the core of the wand, and unlike ordinary gems, it was much larger and shone brilliantly. He immediately concluded that the tribe must have access to a source of such gems, and he knew he needed to obtain it somehow. Using Shadowbang, Hazen struck the wizard, sending him stumbling backward. He then seized the staff and remarked that it seemed they had encountered something truly valuable. The other members of the Kuman tribe were shocked to see that their wizard had been defeated. At that moment, Hazen's team, including Raifa, charged into battle. Hazen believed that they could win as long as they fought together. In the end, they successfully captured the entire tribe. Baz reported that a few tribal members had managed to escape, but he believed they no longer had enough strength to launch an attack on the village. Although there were a few minor and serious injuries among the soldiers, no one had been killed in the battle. Baz wondered whether they should execute the captured tribesmen. Hazen refused and stated that the prisoners should be treated with courtesy because they could later be used as bargaining chips. He then instructed everyone to assess the damage in the nearby village and asked whether any members of the tribe had returned there. Baz apologized and explained that despite searching, they had been unable to find them because the tribe knew the area well and was extremely difficult to track due to their strong hostility toward outsiders. Meanwhile, a small girl was secretly watching them from the bushes. Baz recalled hearing a knight complain that the prisoners had been screaming the entire time. The knight remarked that their language was extremely annoying and said that he wished everything would be finished quickly. Another soldier commented that if Hazen overheard what they were saying, things would not end well for them. As everyone moved forward, the little girl quietly approached the prisoners and tried to free them. However, she was suddenly caught by the guards, who demanded to know what she was doing. They suspected that she was a member of the tribe and was trying to help the prisoners escape. Hazen noticed the commotion and asked what had happened. One of the guards reported that they had caught the girl and added that she had even kicked him while resisting. Hazen replied that it was dangerous for her to be there and remarked that she did not appear to be a member of the Kuman tribe. The girl explained that one of the tribal prisoners had told her that his collar was choking him, so she had only been trying to loosen it. Hazen asked whether anyone could understand the Kuman language. When the girl nodded, he immediately realized that having her on his side would be extremely valuable. He introduced himself and asked for her name. The girl replied that her name was Jan. Hazen smiled warmly at her and remarked that it was dangerous for a young girl to wander around alone. He then said that he would take her safely to the village. Although Jan felt suspicious of his smile, she eventually decided to go with him. On the way, Hazen asked how she was able to understand the Kuman language. Jan explained that she often sold the tribe's gemstones for a good price. Hazen wondered how she managed the profits, but she casually replied that she simply distributed the money she earned from the sales. Hazen asked whether that was not dangerous. Jan explained that the tribe never harmed children, as it was an absolute rule among them. Hazen found it even more surprising that someone so young was able to do such work. Jan then revealed that she was 13 years old. Hazen was shocked because she looked no older than 6. He suspected that her growth had been stunted and thought she should undergo a medical examination. Because of this, Hazen cast a detection spell on her. Jan wondered whether he was using magic. To his surprise, Hazen discovered that she possessed an extraordinarily large amount of magical power hidden within her body. At the same time, he noticed her eyes. Suddenly, Jan asked whether he was all right. Hazen replied that he was fine, but inwardly, he realized that her eyes were exactly the same as those of the person who had granted him his powers. Jan anxiously asked whether she had a serious illness and if she was going to die. Hazen denied it and explained that she actually possessed an immense amount of magical power, but it remained sealed within her body. He then asked whether she had ever been able to use magic. Jan replied that she could not. She explained that magic was something only nobles and members of the royal family could use. She added that she was merely a commoner who had been abandoned at an orphanage, so she did not even know who her parents were. Eventually, they arrived at the devastated village. Baz informed Hazen that, fortunately, there did not appear to be any significant damage. The villagers glared angrily at the Imperial army as they escorted the captured members of the Kuman tribe into the village. One villager even threw a stone at the prisoners, expressing his satisfaction that they had finally been captured. Hazen immediately stopped the villagers and declared that abusing prisoners was strictly forbidden. He warned that anyone who continued to harm them would be punished. However, one of the villagers argued that they were not soldiers like Hazen, and therefore did not care about such rules or laws. Hazen calmly replied that he hoped they would not regret those words. He then stated that he did not intend to tolerate such behavior. As he glared at the man with killing intent, Hazen warned that he was a sorcerer capable of destroying an entire village in a single night. The man immediately turned pale with fear. Hazen then warned everyone not to misunderstand the role of the soldiers. He explained that the Imperial Army existed to protect law-abiding citizens. However, if people openly declared that they would not follow the law, there was little the soldiers could do for them. He pointed at the crowd and warned them never to repeat such actions. He reminded them that both the soldiers and the villagers had to work together. The fact that no one had died was because the soldiers had fulfilled their duty to protect them. If the villagers wished to continue receiving that protection, they also had to endure the hardships that came with war. Hazen further explained that people who chose not to fight for revenge but instead threw stones at defenseless prisoners simply to justify their own hatred truly disgusted him. He urged them to think carefully about the kind of people they wanted to become before acting. Afterward, Hazen and the others resumed their journey. Baz asked whether Hazen was all right. Hazen replied that he had only come to inspect the damage in the village, and that he had no intention of interfering with the villagers' desire for revenge. He added that he had a personal matter to attend to and simply needed Jan to guide him to the orphanage. Baz looked confused and remarked that if Hazen merely needed someone to care for the child, they could arrange that for him. Hazen shook his head and explained that he intended to negotiate with the director of the orphanage. Jan thanked Baz for his concern. Baz apologized, saying that she had witnessed an unpleasant scene earlier and asked whether she had been frightened. Jan replied that she was perfectly fine because there were many children at the orphanage, so she was already used to such situations. She also explained that the orphanage was extremely poor and had nothing of value to sell. Hazen clarified that he was not planning to buy anything. Instead, he announced that he intended to adopt Jan. His declaration left everyone speechless, especially when Hazen smiled in a rather frightening manner. The next day, Hazen went to the orphanage to meet its director, Noruwai. During their meeting, he offered her a gold coin as an advance payment in exchange for allowing Jan to come with him. Hazen explained that his people would also deliver small silver coins to the orphanage every month. Noruwai was delighted to hear this and remarked that she would be receiving a regular income simply by letting Jan go. Hazen replied that he highly valued Jan's abilities. He explained that someone capable of communicating and trading with a tribe that had an entirely different culture was an invaluable asset. Noruwai was surprised and wondered how such a thing had even been possible. Jan explained that she had lived there for a long time and knew how difficult it was to manage the orphanage. That was why she had wanted to help however she could. She then turned toward Hazen and remarked that his offer was still not enough. She stated that if he truly intended to make use of Jan's abilities, he should pay 2 silver coins every month. She added that if Jan was not even worth that much to him, then there was no point in the arrangement. Hazen agreed to the terms. As they left the orphanage, Hazen asked whether those few belongings were all that Jan owned. She replied that most things at the orphanage were shared among everyone, so those few items were all she had. Hazen nodded in understanding and assured her that from then on, she would have her own private room and that her life would become much better. Jan was surprised and asked whether she would have to live with him. She admitted that she did not like that idea. Hazen wondered why, explaining that an officer's quarters were much cleaner than the orphanage. However, Jan was imagining something completely different, so she firmly refused. Hazen remarked that whatever she was worrying about was unnecessary, and added that for the time being her opinion would not change his decision. Jan burst into tears. Hazen admitted that he was impressed she had spoken to him so boldly, as it showed she possessed a great deal of courage. He reflected that money was essential if he wished to gain power and strengthen the empire. Since Jan's abilities could help him earn wealth, he thought she would become an important companion. He even considered adopting her as his younger sister, although he still was not sure what he should do. Jan suddenly became startled and asked him not to make such a frightening expression. Hazen apologized and explained that she had reminded him of his foolish sister. He then declared that from that day onward, he would teach her magic and instructed her to address him as sensei. Jan looked confused and wondered how she could do that when she knew nothing about magic. Hazen explained that her slow physical growth was the result of the enormous amount of magical power sealed inside her body. He compared it to a young child possessing the intelligence of a 12th grade student but having no idea how to use that knowledge. He further explained that if she never learned to control her magic properly, it would eventually go out of control and could seriously harm her. Hazen asked her to trust him. Jan replied that she could not trust him completely yet. Hazen agreed and remarked that she had good judgment. He added that with proper training, she would improve rapidly, and he was looking forward to seeing how strong she would become in the future. As they continued walking, Jan looked around in amazement, thinking that it was the first time she had ever traveled so far from the orphanage. Along the way, Hazen brought up their earlier negotiation and asked whether she realized that she had undervalued herself. He explained that she should have demanded an advance of 5 large gold coins and 3 small silver coins every month. Jan was shocked by the suggestion. Hazen explained that in any negotiation, she should aim to secure at least 80% of the amount she truly desired. Jan wondered whether she should always begin by asking for the maximum possible price. She asked what would happen if the other party refused to buy or demanded an unreasonable amount, such as 100 gold coins. Hazen replied that there was only a fine line between asking for the maximum and crossing the limit. He added that if someone exceeded that limit, the empire could accuse them of illegal trade with foreigners, punish them accordingly, and even turn them into a slave. In the end, everything would return to the same outcome. Jan was horrified by his explanation and remarked that he was truly a cruel person. Hazen explained to her that they really wanted to act as an intermediary with those tribal people and that they needed to help Jan improve her negotiation skills as she was still immature. He added that she at least had potential and that her actual value was around 100 times higher than what they had discussed that day. Bas was listening to the entire conversation as well. At that moment, Jan teased Hazen, wondering if he was actually encouraging her. Hazen denied it and pointed out that she should think about what she was hearing. He explained that if she settled for the negotiated value, she would be of no use to them. She would have to work at least 10 times harder than that to prove her worth. Hazen also became annoyed when Rifa asked him not to put so much pressure on the girls in the group. Rifa then took Jan with her and introduced herself as Hazen's god, saying that she would take care of Jan as well. Jan greeted Rifa and complimented her, saying that she was a very beautiful woman. She was surprised that someone so beautiful was serving in the army. Rifa blushed, as it was the first time someone had complimented her like that. Jan continued praising Rifa, saying that she was the most beautiful woman she had ever seen. She added that she had always wanted a sister and was very happy, wishing that she could have a girl as lovely as Rifa as her sister. Rifa then put her hand on Jan's shoulder while Jan wondered about Rifa's age. Rifa told her that they could talk about it later. Meanwhile, Hazen asked Rifa not to pamper Jan too much. Despite her appearance, Jan was only 18 years old. Jan became angry because Hazen would not even let her enjoy herself. She then shouted that Hazen was a kidnapper and said that she did not want to go back to the orphanage. Finally, they arrived in front of the fortress, where the cavalry of Mosbiza had already been prepared. Hazen was genuinely surprised that they had finished preparing everything after more than half a day. Baz wondered whether it was the first time Hazen had seen them. He did explain that those soldiers had very little real combat experience and were probably afraid of getting injured. That was why they had spent so much time preparing for the war. Just then, Hazen noticed a person sitting on a horse in front of him who appeared to be angry with him. Hazen became confused and wondered who the person was. The person turned out to be Mospiza, who was annoyed with Hazen. Hazen apologized and explained that he had been unable to recognize him because of his posture and the armor and equipment he was wearing. Mospeca then became even ruder and questioned whether Hazen had run back after being defeated. He also wondered whether Hazen had been unable to do anything against the Cuman tribe. However, Hazen revealed that he had defeated all of them and had also ensured the safety of the village. This left Mospeca and the others completely shocked. Hazen and Bas then showed them the prisoners they had captured. Mospeca became angry and questioned why Hazen had not followed his orders. Hazen explained that, judging from the situation, they would not have reached the village in time if they had spent so much time preparing for the battle in the same way. He also pointed out that, thanks to the way he had handled the situation, there had been no damage to the village. Mospeca became angry because he felt that Hazen had deliberately rushed ahead in order to take all the credit for himself. However, Hazen asked Mospeca about his plan and whether he had any special strategy that he could share with him. Mospeca became even more annoyed and questioned what Hazen would have done if the situation had turned into a magical battle. He wondered what would have happened if Hazen had lost, as the entire situation could have turned into a disaster. Hazen glared at him and confidently stated that he would not lose. He explained that even if the worst possible situation had arisen, the members of his squad would have been able to handle things on their own. He argued that they could at least be useful to some extent, unlike those who were merely spending their time preparing for battle. Mospeca laughed at Hazen's statement and mocked him, saying that it was amusing to hear such things from people whom he considered completely useless. He remarked that they could not even read or write properly and pointed out that they had formerly been farmers who were accustomed to working in the fields. He implied that they were essentially disposable soldiers. The members of the 8th Squad became angry after hearing those remarks, but they were unable to respond. Seeing this, Hazen spoke on their behalf and warned Mospeca not to assume that a person's abilities depended on their background or literacy. He further warned Mospeca not to go too far with his words, otherwise things would become unpleasant for him. Hazen even threatened that Mospeca would be crushed like Hulk, crushing cars as if they were toys. Hazen continued arguing with Mospeca and eventually challenged him to a duel. Mospeca became furious and refused, saying that he was not going to waste his time fighting someone as useless as Hazen. Mospeca then angrily asked the others why they were still standing there and ordered them to get moving, as Lorenzo would be arriving soon. Baz thanked Hazen for standing up for them, but Hazen was confused and said that he had not done anything special. He then told Baz to take some rest after the prisoners had been properly secured. Baz left, while Rafa also took Jan away so that she could rest. After everything was settled, Hazen went to meet Captain Lorenzo. He apologized for disturbing him so late, but Lorenzo said that he had also wanted to speak with Hazen and that Hazen had arrived at a good time. Lisa appeared irritated when he saw Hazen and immediately went over to him demanding to know why Hazen had come there. Hazen calmly explained that he had been instructed to come and report everything that had happened with the Cuman tribe. Mospeca questioned why Hazen was not following orders properly and asked whether he even knew who Captain Lorenzo was. Hazen replied that he believed he only needed to follow the instructions given by the captain. Mospeca arrogantly stated that he would decide what Hazen had to do, as though he were the leader. However, before he could continue, Hazen turned toward Lorenzo and tried to explain the situation. Lorenzo was confused because they had not even properly begun their conversation. Hazen calmly explained that Mospeca had ordered him to leave immediately. Mospeca was startled by Hazen's straightforward response and quickly tried to calm the situation. He reminded Hazen that he should not behave disrespectfully toward the captain. Mospeca then moved closer to Hazen, while Hazen wondered whether he could finally begin giving his report. Mospeca agreed and said that Hazen could proceed because the captain had allowed him to do so. Lorenzo then asked Hazen to give his report. Hazen began by suggesting that they should consider exchanging prisoners in order to establish a ceasefire with the Cuman tribe. Mospeca attempted to interrupt him, but Lorenzo asked Mospeca to remain quiet for a while. He explained that he found Hazen's words interesting and wanted to hear everything he had to say. Hazen then turned his attention to the map and began explaining how, where, and why they should proceed. He pointed out that the disputed territory mainly consisted of mountains and had very little value to humans. He explained that because of the Empire's policy of territorial expansion, they had been forced to fight against the tribal people occupying that region. He further stated that according to the fundamental policies established under the Imperial Decree, the ultimate objective was the unification of the continent. Hazen explained that the situation had remained stagnant because two opposing forces were present in the northern region. Considering all these circumstances, Hazen proposed the establishment of the Duchy of Diord as a possible solution to the problem. Lorenzo wondered whether Hazen was talking about large-scale confrontations. However, he was also curious about how they were going to negotiate with the tribe if they did not even share a common language. Hazen explained that he would handle that matter himself. He had already hired a 6-year-old girl who was capable of speaking both languages, and he believed that she would be extremely helpful to them. Lorenzo was surprised and wondered whether Hazen understood the consequences of what he was doing. Hazen agreed that he did and reminded him that there seemed to be a rule within the tribe stating that anyone who harmed or killed a child would be exiled. Lorenzo then wondered whether Hazen believed there was actually a chance of succeeding. Hazen explained that he was not suicidal and was not foolish enough to risk his life without having any hope of success. He also made it clear that he had no intention of allowing himself to be killed. Lorenzo understood Hazen's reasoning and decided that he would take the matter to the higher-ranking officers. Mospiza wondered whether that would really be acceptable and questioned whether they were actually going to listen to Hazen's opinion. Lorenzo suddenly stopped him and assured him that there was no need to worry because he would not mention their names. They all eventually agreed, and Hazen also felt that the matter would be handled appropriately. Mospiza clearly did not want to take responsibility for the matter. He was particularly concerned that even on the front line they had such an unreliable officer. Hazen, meanwhile, thought that he wanted to establish connections with promising officers in the future so that he could eventually aim for a position at the center. Lorenzo explained that if a ceasefire agreement with the tribe could actually be reached, it would be considered a great achievement. He added that Hazen might even have a chance of receiving significant recognition for it. Mospiza was shocked to hear this and became worried about why Hazen would be the one to receive such recognition. He argued that the credit should instead go to Lorenzo, who had approved such a reckless proposal, and that it should not simply be considered Hazen's personal achievement. Lorenzo remarked that if recognition were awarded merely for approving proposals, someone might end up receiving it every year. Mospiza continued to deny the idea and insisted that Hazen should know his place. He pointed out that the last time a special merit award from the general had been given, even the current highest commander had been involved in the matter. He then argued that there had even been a debate over whether a superior captain should receive such recognition and suggested that at the very least, it should go to someone serving as a lieutenant. Lorenzo then wondered whether Mospiza believed that he himself deserved the merit. Mospiza immediately became very respectful and explained that he had dedicated his entire life to the Empire. He compared his devotion to the Empire to being devoted to a girlfriend for whom he would even be willing to die. He further compared himself with Hazen, pointing out that Hazen had only joined that very month. Hazen agreed with the general sentiment, explaining that he was also striving to achieve success with the ceasefire agreement. Since they now had an opportunity to speak, Hazen asked whether he could have a casual conversation with Lorenzo. Lorenzo agreed, saying that he rarely had the opportunity to talk with young people and was glad to have the chance now. During their conversation, Lorenzo asked whether Hazen knew about the military strategies of Jill Sasuzara. He explained that Jill Sasuzara had been a hero who had left his mark when the empire was still very small. Lorenzo admitted that he was not an expert in history and had only heard about the hero. He then explained that Jill Sasuzara had left behind a military strategy in which soldiers were classified into 4 different types. The first type consisted of those who had both strong physical endurance and an iron will. The second type consisted of frontline commanders. The third type included those who lacked the will but possessed the necessary skills. The fourth and final type consisted of those who possessed neither the will nor the skills. Hazen further added that according to the hero's strategy, those belonging to the fourth category should be eliminated immediately. Lorenzo was left feeling that Hazen's way of thinking was very different from what he had expected. Hazen then bowed and stated that he had finished giving his report and that he would now take his leave. Lorenzo appreciated Hazen's efforts. As Hazen left, Lorenzo remarked to himself that Hazen was truly a terrifying person. Jan was also playing with the fruits while the Will tribal people watched her from the freezer. She then gave some of the fruits to Mr. Moko and asked him to be serious and teach her properly. Josh talked about the language so that she could continue learning it, while Hazen watched everything from nearby. Baz was also sitting beside Hazen. Hazen felt that Jan was progressing very well. Baz agreed and explained that her youthful appearance helped her gain the trust of the others. She was not only holding conversations with them, but was also learning their manners and customs, which made her seem like a good and innocent girl. Hazen felt that she had gathered enough information about the negotiations and that, with this, the negotiations should go smoothly. The people hesitated about all those things, but Hazen told Baz not to flatter her and said that he should learn as well. Once, while Hazen was enjoying tea with Jan, she mentioned that there was another person besides her who could speak the Kuman language. Hazen wondered if she was talking about someone in particular and asked how she had learned the language. Jan explained that she had learned everything by herself. Hazen said that he would not lie if she was going to find out the truth, and suggested that it was probably the merchant who had helped her contact her tribe. Jan admitted that she had suspected the same, but she had somehow faced resistance from the others. Hazen remarked that it was unsettling how easily she could see through everything. Jan promised that she would not talk about it. Hazen assured her that he was not going to arrest that person and explained that he only wanted to talk to him about business. Hazen, along with Jan, went to meet the person they had summoned. The man had been surprised to receive the sudden summons and had been worried about coming there, but he became relaxed when he saw that the person waiting for him was only a young boy. Hazen directly asked the man how he had been able to speak the language that he had taught Jan. The man wondered what Hazen was talking about and whether the soldiers actually took the words of children seriously. Hazen then showed him a document that absolved him of responsibility for anything he said during their conversation, along with a coin as compensation for his time. The man looked at the coin and wondered whether it would really be enough. He also made it clear that even if he lied to them, there was no guarantee that he would tell them the truth. Hazen calmly stated that they would be the ones to decide what was true and what was not. The man looked into Hazen's eyes and noticed the terrifying killing intent within them. Realizing that refusing to cooperate would be dangerous, he decided to speak in exchange for the compensation. He explained that he was a merchant and that there was nothing particularly special about how he had learned the language. He had once been in a relationship with a woman from that tribe, and through her he had learned their language. The merchant then moved closer to Jan and gently patted her head. He explained that he had also taught her about various crafts and that all the children had been very kind toward her. Because of that, he had searched for a promising child in the orphanage and had found Jan, who had been exceptionally intelligent. However, he was still curious about Hazen's motive for bringing him there. Hazen explained that he believed a ceasefire agreement between the Empire and the tribe would soon be signed and that he wanted to begin trading with the tribe as soon as possible. The merchant was genuinely surprised by this and wondered whether Hazen was joking. He pointed out that Hazen should understand how much blood had already been shed because of the long conflict. Hazen revealed that the sorcerer of the tribe was already being held in prison and that this situation could provide them with an opportunity to negotiate. Once they managed to establish themselves within the circle, they would have a chance to begin negotiations. The merchant could not fully understand everything Hazen was saying, but he somehow felt that Hazen was talking about smuggling. This made him even more curious about how much Hazen intended to charge him. Hazen explained that he did not want to engage in such dealings because he believed that people who conducted legitimate businesses deserved to receive fair compensation for their property and efforts. However, he had one condition. He wanted the merchant to give him the rights to conduct the first trade negotiation with the tribe, while Jan would decide the amount that would be paid. Jan was surprised by the arrangement, but the merchant agreed to accept the deal and expressed his appreciation to both of them. He also congratulated Jan for having found such a good man. The merchant admitted that he had previously believed imperial soldiers only used their power to enrich themselves, but after meeting Hazen, he realized that Hazen was completely different. The merchant then spoke more personally about the woman who had taught him the tribal language. He explained that she had been executed by the tribe simply because she had associated with an imperial man. He admitted that he had been insensitive to the situation and had continued trading despite what had happened. However, there had been times when he had wished that being together with her had not been punished so harshly. Hazen, however, made it clear that he was acting according to his own benefits and goals and told the merchant that he could decide what he wanted to do with the opportunity. 3 days later, Hazen and the others finally headed toward the mountain range. They discussed how the Kuman tribe and the Empire had been at war for a long time and wondered whether it would actually be possible to sign a peace treaty with the Kuman tribe. Hazen learned that everything would ultimately depend on what the tribal leader thought and whether the information they had received from the captive was actually true. As they continued forward, the four of them were eventually surrounded by members of the tribe. The tribal people tried to communicate with them in their own language. Eventually, Hazen, Jan, and Rafa reached the tribe. Rafa felt uneasy because she could sense the stares of the tribal people around them, and their attention made her worried. Hazen agreed that the situation was concerning, but he pointed out that something similar had been happening for some time in the mountain village they had previously visited. Since the tribal people were still guiding them toward their settlement instead of attacking them, Hazen believed that there was a possibility that they were also willing to negotiate. The three of them entered a house where Hazen introduced himself and thanked the leader, the Blue Queen Baja, for receiving them. Baja was surprised that Hazen had not only mastered their language, but had also learned their customs. Hazen explained that they had come to discuss the ceasefire agreement. However, Baja questioned whether Hazen actually believed that they would simply allow him to leave the tribe alive after coming there. Suddenly, the tribal people pointed their weapons at them, which made Jan nervous. Basia, however, smiled calmly. As the leader, she wanted to see what Hazen intended to do next. Hazen first apologized for being overly formal and for arriving without giving them any prior notice. Jan, meanwhile, appeared increasingly worried and began looking around for an escape route. However, the tribal warriors stopped her from moving away. Basia noticed this and ordered her people not to point their spears at the girl because she was too young and small to be treated as a threat. Hazen commented that they did not need to worry about such things and questioned whether their softness toward the girl was not exactly the reason their tribe had been formed in the first place. Basia did not take his words personally. She explained that they were a clan of warriors who lived with pride and did not desire prosperity that had been built upon the indiscriminate killing of women, children, or the elderly. Hazen was surprised to hear such words from her and agreed that she was absolutely correct. He pointed out that if the Empire's army found it beneficial, they would certainly use their military power to seize the entire territory. Basia had already analyzed the staff of one of the men from the tribe and knew that there were natural deposits of magical gems within their territory. She believed that the Empire had not yet tried to defeat them because the mountain region was considered worthless. Hazen compared the situation to Nobita, feeling that he was worthless without Doraemon's gadgets. However, Hazen also understood that the mountain region's apparent worthlessness would not last forever. It was only a matter of time before the magical gems were discovered. Once that happened, the neighboring countries would undoubtedly become interested in them, and the region would eventually turn into a fierce battleground. Basia then wondered why Hazen had not revealed the existence of the magical gems to the Empire and allowed them to seize the territory. Hazen openly explained that the reason was simple. He wanted those gems for himself. Basia became confused and irritated by his answer. She felt that Hazen must have completely lost his mind and concluded that she would probably have to kill him. Hazen asked her to wait before making such a decision. He then took out a magic wand and asked her to examine it first. One of the tribal men cautiously took the wand to Basia, assuming that there was no trap or hidden mechanism inside it. Basia examined the object and realized that it was indeed a good quality magic wand. However, she still wondered what made it so special and why Hazen had chosen to show it to her. Hazen revealed that the magic wand had been his own work and that he had created it approximately 2 years earlier. Basia was confused because the Empire had an exclusive contract system and wondered how Hazen had been able to create something like it. Hazen explained that he had stolen the technique and had continued working to improve his skills. However, the crafting guild imposed many restrictions, while magical gems were extremely expensive to use for training and experimentation. That was why he wanted access to the magical gems possessed by the tribe. Hazen explained that if they cooperated, they might be able to sign a ceasefire agreement without revealing the existence of the gem deposits to the Empire. He also assured Basia that he had already secured a safe route for trade. Basia understood that Hazen did not intend to sell the magic wands to the Empire. Instead, he wanted the tribe to sell the magical gems to him while he would provide them with the magic wands that he crafted. She realized that the arrangement could be highly beneficial for both sides. However, she still hesitated because Hazen was an imperial soldier and appeared to be attempting to betray his own country. Hazen clarified that he had his own personal goals and had no intention of becoming a servant of the Empire. He wanted to pursue his own ambitions rather than spend his life serving the Empire's interests. Basia found Hazen increasingly interesting. She also understood that without a stronger force to protect them, the tribe would eventually be exploited from within and would have no means of defending themselves. Basia then came down from her throne and declared that with Hazen's help, they would no longer remain a backwater tribe that others could simply overlook or exploit. Hazen became curious and wondered whether her words meant that she had accepted his offer. Basia told him not to rush to conclusions. She reminded him that they were a clan of warriors and that, in their eyes, the weak could not easily be trusted. Basia then called Oribes, who was the second strongest warrior in the Kuman tribe. Hazen understood what Basia was trying to imply and agreed to give the duel a try. The members of the Kuman tribe began cheering for Oribes, hoping that he would teach a good lesson to the imperial soldier, Hazen. However, one of the people standing beside Reifa felt that the situation was not looking good. He explained that Oribes had repelled imperial and Dougal soldiers numerous times in the past. Basia then explained the rules of the duel. She stated that the last person standing between Hazen and his opponent would be declared the winner. Oribes even summoned his ice dragon and commented on how fierce the battle was going to be. He warned Hazen to be careful, apparently considering him to be nothing more than a rookie. Hazen, however, remained confident. He remarked that it was going to be a magnificent duel, especially considering that it was taking place at the level of an imperial colony. He also stated that Oribes' earlier speech had not been bad. Oribes warned Hazen that he should not disappoint Basia. The battle then began, and Oribes attacked Hazen with the crystal dragon. Hazen quickly jumped aside to dodge the attack. He commented that the warning seemed to have been justified and acknowledged that it appeared he would not be able to defeat the Shadow Fang so easily. However, Hazen immediately prepared a lightning spell behind himself. The sudden appearance of the lightning magic left everyone shocked and wondering what kind of technique Hazen had just used. Hazen had tried to explain earlier that he was someone who had lived across 2 different continents and had learned both methods of magic. However, traveling between the 2 continents was currently impossible. He was probably the only person who knew about the existence and connection between both continents. Hazen now felt that he had to start from scratch. With that in mind, he unleashed a large number of magical wands against Oribes. Oribes became furious and argued that no matter how many low-quality wands Hazen used, the outcome would remain the same. Oribes suddenly attacked Hazen again, but Hazen easily blocked the attack with an earth shield. Hazen explained that when the range of an attack was expanded, its power decreased proportionally. Therefore, even a long-range earth shield with relatively low power could withstand the attack without much difficulty. It was then Hazen's turn to attack. Oribes noticed that Hazen was holding something else in his hands and wondered whether he was actually holding a magical wand in each hand. Oribes began to feel that Hazen was a monster for being capable of using both simultaneously. Hazen explained that if something was unique enough to become a part of history, it was possible to increase its power significantly. He also mentioned that he had heard of 4 individuals who were capable of performing something similar. Hazen finally launched an attack at the ice dragon. However, the ice dragon did not fall immediately and continued to withstand the attack, leaving everyone shocked. Hazen revealed that the magical wand he had used was called the Crimson Lotus. Because the wand specialized in concentrating its power into a single strike that could only be performed once a day, its attack power was tremendously increased. Hazen then prepared to use another attack. Upon seeing this, Oribes instinctively tried to protect himself with his hands. However, Hazen simply watched him without attacking immediately. Oribes gradually regained his confidence and began to suspect that Hazen's actions had merely been a bluff. He believed that Hazen had already run out of time and explained that as long as his own magical power remained, the ice dragon would continue to resurrect. The ice dragon did exactly that and resurrected once again. However, something unexpected happened. Oribes suddenly found himself being captured. He became confused and initially thought that a third person had somehow intervened in the battle. Hazen explained that there had been no third person. The attack had come from the other magical wand, which had a remote control function that allowed it to manipulate and transmit magical power from a distance. Oribes became furious after realizing that he had been deceived. Hazen then approached Oribes while using electric magic and explained that the most important thing in a battle was to deceive one's opponent. Hazen also commented that Oribes was very straightforward and simple-minded, comparing his nature to the pure love a boy might have for his girlfriend. Hazen then wondered whether Oribes was satisfied with the outcome. At that moment, Basia stopped the duel and declared Hazen the winner. Hazen understood that his method had been the most effective one. The problem of managing the flow of magical power had been solved by using multiple magical wands simultaneously. Basia approached Hazen and became curious about how many magical wands he possessed in total. She also wondered how he had managed to take out and put away so many wands without anyone noticing. Hazen showed her a ring-tied magical wand that he had created. He explained that it allowed all the other magical wands to become invisible and that he could exchange them with Nendo as part of a small trick. Basia could not completely understand how the trick worked. Instead, she felt that the entire technique was something extraordinary and almost monstrous. Hazen explained that what he had shown them was still not enough to reveal everything he could do. He could provide them with various kinds of magical wands that would suit their needs, and he even revealed another one of his secrets to prove that he was capable of doing so. Despite everything, Bazia felt that having Hazen as an ally would be terrifying. However, she felt that having him as an enemy would be far more frightening. Hazen appreciated Basia's understanding. Finally, Basia announced in front of everyone that the Kuman tribe would sign the ceasefire agreement with the Empire. Everyone agreed with Basia's decision, and there was no voice of opposition. Basia explained that everyone had to respect the leader's decision, although she knew that many members of the tribe would still hold a grudge against the Empire. She acknowledged that their hatred was understandable because they had suffered many losses and had endured great hardships. The previous clan leader had always encouraged them to fight bravely until the very end. However, Basia stated that she did not want to continue following that path. After making her decision clear, Basia asked everyone to welcome their guests and bring out the sake. Hazen became slightly worried when he saw the barrels of alcohol. He appreciated their hospitality, but admitted that he did not like drinking alcohol because he believed it reduced one's ability to think clearly. Basia playfully leaned against Hazen as though they had already become close friends. At the same time, she jokingly threatened that she would break the agreement if Hazen refused to enjoy the celebration with them. Hazen then looked toward Jan and Rafa. Rafa became excited at the sight of the meat and alcohol, while Jan also seemed eager to enjoy the feast. Hazen became annoyed because Jan had not done anything particularly useful so far. However, she quickly joined the feast and began enjoying herself. Hazen commented that alcohol could be very profitable when sold to children, and jokingly suggested that they should leave the party after performing a show dance. Jan became embarrassed and blushed at the suggestion. Basia then asked Hazen for his help and wondered whether Jan was actually his daughter. Hazen immediately denied this and explained that he had only adopted Jan because of her talent. He also said that he intended to introduce her to the merchant later, as she would act as a mediator between them. He wanted her to gain practical experience in trade, which was why he had asked Basia to travel with her. Basia hesitated because Jan appeared to be very young and small. Jan agreed with Hazen's plan, while Basia commented that if Hazen had brought Jan with him, then Jan could not be an ordinary child. Jan then mentioned the frightening things she had experienced because of Hazen. Hazen explained that there was another child around the age of 13 who had also been involved in such matters. Jan became annoyed because Hazen continued lecturing her. She nevertheless admitted that Hazen had a surprisingly caring personality. Basia enjoyed watching the interaction between them and eventually continued drinking with Hazen. The evening turned into a surprisingly pleasant celebration. Everyone laughed and enjoyed themselves, and Basia felt that it had been a genuinely good day. She believed that they could now move forward together on a better path. Meanwhile, Jan, Rafa, and the others continued enjoying the celebration. The next day, Hazen returned and revealed the truth about the ceasefire agreement. The revelation left Mospica shocked, as he could hardly believe that Hazen had actually managed to make the agreement happen. Still, Mospica mentioned that the agreement could not be forged. Hazen then told him that, for formalizing the agreement later, Basia would pay them a visit, and it would be appreciated if Commander Gedol could attend as well. Mospica was unable to understand and wondered whether Lorenzo had not informed Hazen about it. Hazen denied it and explained that he had been ordered to tell Mospica about the matter. Mospica still could not believe it and felt that it was the greatest achievement in the history of the Fourth Company. He considered the special merit something that had once seemed like an unattainable dream. Hazen became confused upon hearing this. He felt that Mospica was acting as though he had done everything perfectly, even though he had actually obstructed the situation, evaded his responsibilities, and was now trying to take all the credit. Mospica tried to be friendly with Hazen by explaining that it was not even his own idea, but rather that the Fourth Company deserved to receive the special merit. He also pointed out that the 8th platoon belonged to the 4th Company and that their misconduct was clearly visible. Hazen then explained that the problems were the result of the lack of guidance from the lieutenant and insufficient supervision. Mospica became annoyed and argued that it had nothing to do with that, as they all simply had bad conduct. Hazen then asked him to recommend only the 8th platoon for the special merit. Mospica became confused and wondered why Hazen was making such a request. He even wondered whether Hazen had been listening to him at all. Hazen agreed that the merit would benefit the 8th platoon, but he explained that he was not going to take responsibility for the 8th platoon. He added that wanting the merit without taking responsibility for the platoon did not make any sense. Mospitza wondered whether the platoon would not also benefit if the 4th Company received the special merit. He then asked Hazen not to be like that and advised him to think more flexibly. However, Hazen replied that the people outside the 8th platoon would not make any effort themselves. Mospitza became increasingly angry and commented that Hazen was being rude all the time. He then moved toward Hazen as though he intended to attack him. Hazen used his magic staff to make Mospitza fall back and released a powerful killing intent, which left Mospitza frightened. Hazen then apologized and explained that he had only killed a harmful insect. He added that he was an imperial soldier for the future of the empire and intended to eliminate all the corrupt people as well. Mospitza became annoyed and stated that he was not going to recommend Hazen for the special merit. Hazen simply asked him to proceed with the matter, explaining that he had already been waiting for a long time and that it was now time for him to leave. Mospitza became annoyed again and wondered whether Hazen intended to submit the report on his own. Hazen agreed and explained that it was the order given to him by the captain. Mospitza then wondered what Hazen intended to report. Hazen replied that it was the same matter as before. Since Mospitza was not going to trust Hazen with the report, he insisted that Hazen should at least report that the 4th Company deserved to receive the special merit. Hazen's group later reported to the command, and Hazen was not willing to believe what was happening. However, the captain ordered him to stay. Hazen stated that the 4th Company should receive the special merit. Mospitza became annoyed upon hearing Hazen say it that way, as it sounded as though Mospitza had been the one forcing him to stay. He also understood that Hazen was doing it deliberately. Hazen then wondered whether it was not according to Mospitza's instructions. Mospitza commented that it was completely different and suggested that they rehearse the report. He stated that he was not going to let Hazen leave until Hazen got it right. Mospitza became even more annoyed and shouted that it was fine to let Lorenzo wait. Someone who had come from behind commented that doing so would be the problematic part. Mospitza turned around angrily at being interrupted at such a time, but when he saw who had arrived, he was shocked to find that it was none other than Lorenzo. Lorenzo had heard everything and understood that Mospitza had been trying to manipulate the situation so that his entire plan would succeed and he would gain the desired marriage arrangement. Mospitza became frightened, while Lorenzo wondered whether he had been there since the beginning. Hazen then explained that he had already been given strict orders to report everything to Lorenzo. Mospitza started to leave, and considering the relationship between them, Lorenzo asked him to wait outside. Mospitza became annoyed and grabbed Hazen by the collar. Hazen pretended to be innocent, but deep down, he had planned everything. He had deliberately arranged the situation so that Lorenzo would hear everything by himself. However, Hazen had not expected Mospitza to take things so far. Lorenzo became furious with Mospitza and told him that he should be ashamed of himself for doing something like that. He considered it premature to have entrusted Mospitza with the position of lieutenant and stated that he would request Mospitza's demotion. He also declared that Hazen would receive the promotion instead. Those words made Hazen happy. With a frightening smile, he asked Lorenzo whether he was really certain about the decision, explaining that he would completely crush anyone who was corrupt from within. Mospitza was frightened of Hazen as well. He wondered what kind of ghost he had ended up dealing with and suddenly grabbed Lorenzo's leg. Lorenzo finally agreed to the arrangement, explaining that it would only be temporary until the promotion was officially announced. Until then, Hazen was to be treated as having authority equivalent to that of a lieutenant. Hazen agreed. He thought that the lieutenant seemed like a kind and gentle person and probably would not like seeing the weak being tormented. However, Hazen made his intentions toward Mospitza clear by requesting that Mospitza be assigned to the 4th Company. He explained that Mospitza had developed bad habits, including abusing the NCOs of the unit, and stated that he would punish him immediately for such behavior. Lorenzo agreed, but asked Hazen to make sure that it did not turn into personal revenge or excessive punishment. Hazen agreed, although his expression did not reveal what he was thinking. He simply stated that he would only crush the rotten spirit inside Mospitza. Mospitza was practically melting in front of Lorenzo out of fear. Lorenzo also appreciated Hazen's abilities and explained that after only 1 month, Hazen would immediately be promoted to first lieutenant. More importantly, Hazen suggested that they should take the next step. Lorenzo became confused upon hearing this and wondered what Hazen meant. Hazen then went to meet Jan and Rifa. When he arrived, he found that Jan was sleeping. Rifa wondered why Hazen had taken so long. Hazen explained that they had walked through the mountains the previous day, which was why it had taken so long. Hazen felt that Jan should get some sleep because her body was still small and she needed the rest. He told her that it was good for her to take some time to recover, as the next challenge would be the war against the Duchy of Diordo. Raifa was surprised and spoke loudly out of concern, which even caused Jan to wake up. Jan rubbed her eyes and looked around, wondering what was going on. Hazen then gave Jan a letter and asked her to deliver it to Queen Basia. Jan agreed, although she somehow had a bad feeling about the request. Hazen then asked about the trade. Jan replied that they had already prepared a large amount of magatma for delivery and that it seemed Hazen would be bringing high-quality jewels the next time. Hazen thought that if they were planning to keep such goods hidden, it was impressive. He also considered that if they flooded the market with the jewels all at once, their value would collapse. However, he believed that they would be able to handle the situation on their own. Jan then told Hazen about something she had overheard. Hazen had already suggested to the captain that they should go to war against the Duchy of Diordo. He explained that they should launch the attack before the ceasefire agreement became known to the enemy. The enemy fortress had around 5,000 soldiers stationed there, but if they learned about the attack beforehand, they could gather nearly 6 times that number. Hazen discussed all of this with Lorenzo. Lorenzo understood that the matter had already been discussed among the higher-ups, but the timing was extremely bad, and many things remained uncertain. Hazen explained that it would be equally difficult for the opponent to gather enough logistics for such a large force. He believed that they should simply keep following up with their units, as that was essential. He also stated that it would be entirely possible to manage the situation until the fortress gates were opened. Lorenzo understood that Hazen was highly capable, but he reminded him that the fortress had General Gizar, who could use lightning attribute magic and was practically a powerhouse. Hazen heard this and thought that such a person was extremely rare and powerful, comparing it to something as unlikely as seeing Iron Man return to the Avengers. However, Hazen also felt that, at the moment, there were many powerful individuals around, and even Marcus's forces had already made a name for themselves. Hazen continued discussing the matter with Lorenzo. He learned that Marcus was also expected to assist them within a few months. Lorenzo also explained that the chief was well aware of how reckless it would be to start a war at that particular time. Hazen understood and decided to leave, thinking that there was no point in pushing the matter any further for the time being. The scene then returned to the present, where Pitou was explaining the situation to Jan and Raifa. He mentioned that the war had come at a particularly complicated time, especially since they had only just reconciled with the Kumin tribe. He wondered why they would choose to attack such a formidable opponent. The fortress had originally seemed like nothing more than a distant dream, but they had somehow managed to shift the nearest stalemate. It was undeniably an unexpected development for everyone. Pitou considered that the situation had unfolded exactly as expected and wondered whether they should get going. At the training ground, Hazen explained the situation while Mospiza suddenly fell from a horse. Hazen was genuinely surprised when he saw it happen. Hazen remembered that Lorenzo had mentioned Mospiza's background. He was the 5th son of a 9th-rank noble. Although Mospiza had no right to inherit the family estate, his family would not simply allow him to be dismissed from the military. He had a very wild personality and was also considered to have poor intelligence. Hazen felt that Mospiza was practically useless because he did not seem to possess any worthwhile skills. He then casually wondered whether he should simply kill him. Mospiza became annoyed upon hearing this and questioned what Hazen was saying. He warned Hazen not to make such reckless remarks merely because he was currently favored by the captain. One of the officers in charge then struck the back of Mospiza's hand with a weapon, causing blood to come out. Mospiza became frightened as well as furious. He could not believe that a commoner like Hazen was treating a high-ranking noble in such a manner. He warned that Hazen should not think he would be able to escape from the situation so easily. Hazen calmly reminded him that rank was everything in the military and that they were currently operating under military rules. Mospiza then used more respectful language while still expressing his anger. He warned Hazen that his family would not remain silent and that he would surely make sure Hazen received the highest punishment available. Hazen remained completely relaxed and acted as though he did not care about Mospiza's threats. He pointed out that Mospiza did not have any right to inherit his family's estate. Despite having the backing of a high-ranking noble family, Mospiza had only managed to become a lieutenant and had ultimately turned out to be a failure. Mospiza began shaking upon hearing this. Hazen continued by explaining that it was also the responsibility of a superior-ranked officer to arrange leave for their subordinates. He considered that priority should be given to those who had not yet had the opportunity to return to their homes. However, he thought that it would be extremely rare for someone like Mospiza to receive such an opportunity. Hazen further pointed out that if Mospiza had used considerable connections to pass the officer examination and enter military life by flattering his superiors, then his incompetence was hardly surprising. Mospiza argued that everything Hazen was saying was merely his imagination. He insisted that Hazen had no evidence and was only insulting him. Hazen replied that the situation was completely obvious and that it was embarrassing for a family to have someone like Mospiza among its members. Mospiza became extremely angry and eventually dropped to his knees. Hazen then casually mentioned that if Mospiza wanted to change his status and become a high-ranking slave, Hazen could probably arrange it through one of his acquaintances. Mospiza became furious and accused Hazen of bullying him. Hazen replied that the moment their positions had been reversed, Mospiza had started acting like the victim. He then asked whether Mospiza had already forgotten what he had done earlier to the second lieutenant and the warrant officer who had died before Hazen's arrival. Mospiza immediately fell silent. Hazen then began explaining the incident. Mospiza shouted that such a thing could not be considered evidence. However, Hazen pointed out that after committing such crimes repeatedly and gradually, Mospiza would have to be incredibly foolish not to realize that everyone already knew about his actions and had simply chosen to remain silent. Everyone looked toward Mospiza, which made him feel regretful and caused him to reflect on his actions. However, he still asked who among them would ever show mercy to someone like him, or treat him as anything other than a slave. Hazen gave him a devilish smile and wondered what Mospiza had done to someone who had once pleaded with him for mercy. Mospiza became frightened and admitted that he did not want to become a slave. Hazen then called Baz and asked whether there was any point in continuing the conversation when Mospiza was clearly unwilling to listen. He instructed Baz to thoroughly discipline Mospiza using the diary as a reference for his actions. Hazen then decided to return to his room. Before leaving, Hazen also ordered Baz to bring Mospiza back to him if he was about to die, as Hazen knew what he would do in such a situation. Baz agreed, and Hazen returned to the room. When he met Jan and Rafa, Hazen explained that things would not always go as smoothly as they wanted. Jan felt that Hazen seemed worried. Hazen admitted that even if it sounded rude, he also had concerns like anyone else. He further explained that he did not completely dislike the idea of changing Mospiza's status into that of a high-level slave. If Mospiza became one, the magic contract would bind him, and he could still become useful to them. Rifa was surprised to hear how seriously Hazen was considering the matter. She wondered what Hazen was actually planning to do and felt that his words sounded more like the determination of someone who had already made up his mind. She also began thinking that perhaps her own future had been decided in a similar manner. Hazen explained that such concern was natural between friends. Jan became upset and warned Hazen not to say such things as though he would never need anyone. Hazen then reminded Rafa that she belonged to a minority specializing in combat. He explained that within the Empire, she was deeply involved in magic and surrounded by various intrigues, making it difficult for her to handle everything on her own. He believed that she needed someone who could understand her very well. Jan wondered whether Hazen was implying that Rifa needed someone like him. However, Jan could not remain quiet after hearing that. Hazen then called Rifa a rookie and explained that it was natural for her not to understand because she was still in her first year. Rifa became annoyed and pointed out that both she and Hazen were from the same generation. Suddenly, Hazen remembered something and commented that, when considering their difference in skills and experience, he was practically like an employee with 100 years of experience. Rafa stated that she would never want to work for such a long period, and Jan agreed with her. Hazen became confused and wondered why they were complaining, explaining that they would have to work for at least 2,000 years anyway. To him, it seemed completely normal because they were immortals who could live for such a long time. Jan and Rafa then left. Jan needed to teach Baz the language, while Rafa intended to help with the training. The scene then shifted to the fortress of the Duchy of Deordo. A magic barrier had been cast around the fortress, neutralizing incoming projectiles. Gizardu watched the barrier and felt that it was perfect for defense. However, he somehow found the situation boring. The fortress was said to be impregnable because of its powerful armored soldiers, all of whom were fully equipped and prepared for battle. One of the people nearby asked whether the situation had something to do with the person who had hit the minister and subsequently been demoted. Gizar replied that the demotion had not been caused by that alone. He explained angrily that the minister was incompetent, had exploited an opportunity for his own benefit, and had attempted to negotiate a deal for personal gain. Therefore, it was only natural that he had received 1 or 2 hits. Gizar became increasingly irritated and even wished that the Empire would attack them. The person beside him immediately asked him not to say such unlucky things. Just then, a man approached Gazar. Gazar wondered whether he had brought news about a fight or an impending battle. However, the man explained that someone wanted to meet Gazar privately. Gazar became interested and felt that something interesting might finally happen. As he went to meet the person, he wondered whether it could be a betrayal or some kind of trap. Nevertheless, he decided that they should at least investigate. Gazar had been growing increasingly bored, so the mysterious meeting seemed rather interesting to him. Finally, he met the person and wondered why he had come there and whether he might be a spy. The man introduced himself as an officer from the 2nd Battalion of the Northern District of Garna, belonging to the Gastro Empire. He presented Gazar with a copy of a letter and explained that he had been ordered to eliminate Captain Lorenzo and Hazen. The person standing before Gazar was none other than Mospiza himself. A few days had passed. At the Argide fortress, a man who had been ill for a while had finally obtained the necessary proof. Shepherd's child Rue from the Four Counts was also heading toward them. Since the imperial caravan had been entering and leaving the territory of the Kuman tribe, it seemed that the ceasefire agreement was genuine. Mospiza and Gazar wondered why everyone had been gathered there. Gazar appeared extremely excited and expressed his desire to go to war. However, the cavalry commander Nidel commented that he did not really understand the situation, but they should show the country what they were capable of doing. The infantry commander Noyudada tried to calm Nidel down. He said that they should first explain the details and background of the situation before making any decisions. Lanbru, the guard commander, apologized for startling everyone and finally began explaining the incident. Earlier, Mospiza had gone to meet Gizar and told him about the matter. When he showed Gizar the documents, Gizar could hardly believe what he was seeing. Mospiza explained that he had also verified the information with the relevant department. Even after hearing this, Gizar wondered why Mospiza, who was an officer of the Empire, was betraying it. Mospiza appeared furious because of Hazen. He claimed that Hazen had taken everything away from him and had stolen everything that belonged to him. Gizar then understood that Mospiza had been unable to control even his own subordinate, which made the entire situation seem almost laughable. Mospiza explained that Hazen was no longer merely a second lieutenant. He had concluded a ceasefire agreement with the Kuman tribe and had created the momentum necessary to launch an attack on the fortress. Gizar was also surprised after hearing this. He realized that if the documents were genuine, he would have to examine them carefully. He then wondered what kind of reward he should give Mospiza and suggested that perhaps Mospiza wanted a position within the duchy. However, Mospiza gave an unexpected answer. He simply wanted Hazen and Lorenzo to be killed. Gizar agreed to his request. He understood that Mospiza's demand was motivated by personal revenge and that his reasons were rather disgusting. Nevertheless, eliminating Hazen and Lorenzo would benefit the duchy, so Gizar accepted Mospiza's request. At that moment, Lanbru thought about everything that had happened and realized that the circumstances had allowed them to recapture the territory. It seemed that they had underestimated the situation. Gizar assured Mospiza that he would definitely kill both Hazen and Lorenzo. Upon hearing this, Mospiza became excited. The scene returned to the present, where Lanbru explained the entire matter to everyone and told them that this was the reason they had all been gathered there. Gizar then ordered them to request the participation of General Ganadoraru and his 50,000 men from the capital. Lanbru commented that Gizar was making the matter sound far too easy. However, if they intended to defend themselves against Mishiru, gathering such a large force was indeed necessary. Gizar became increasingly excited at the thought of raising an army to capture the Empire's fortress. The prospect made him even more enthusiastic. Lanbru then wondered how they were going to deal with the Kuman tribe and whether their forces would be enough. Regarding the Kuman tribe, Gizar remained completely relaxed. He ordered that 5,000 soldiers be assigned to hold them off. Gizar further explained that the ceasefire agreement was not an alliance and was certainly not the kind of relationship in which they would surround themselves and attack together. At that moment, Nidel became extremely fired up and slammed his fist against the table so hard that it nearly broke. He declared that Hazen's plan would surely backfire on him. Gizar agreed with Nidel and stated that if it had not been for the whistleblower, the situation would not have been so dangerous for them. He even thought that it might be interesting to capture Hazen alive and question him. Nidel then wondered what they should do to eliminate Hazen, as Mospiza had requested. Gizar, however, had no intention of keeping a promise made to such a lowly traitor. The scene then shifted to the northern Garna fortress, where Hazen was talking with Lorenzo. A large army led by Gizar was heading toward the fortress and had already reached a nearby village. Hazen realized that the information had arrived far too late. Lorenzo explained that the command had been divided over whether they should resist the enemy or retreat. Since the information had not yet reached all their ranks, the situation had become extremely bad for them. Hazen assumed that they would be discussing how they should defend themselves, as there was always someone who became a hindrance during such situations. Lorenzo then informed Hazen that the Barasag detachment had already withdrawn and that they were apparently aiming for the downfall of Gedal. Hazen wondered whether there was still any hope of winning. However, he thought that if his second-in-command, Lieutenant Colonel Barasag of the Northern Forest Detachment, had retreated, their troops would effectively be reduced by half. Hazen understood that they could only rely on his plan. Therefore, he and Lorenzo went before all the senior officers. Magno appeared extremely tense and wondered why Lorenzo had arrived so late. Lorenzo asked him to listen to Hazen's plan first. Hazen was actually pleased to learn that Barasag had withdrawn, as they would be able to accuse him of desertion later. Magno then asked Hazen not to flatter them and instead tell them everything he had in mind. Hazen declared that he would defeat Gazar without allowing the army of the duchy to collapse. Magno felt that Hazen's claim was nothing more than an unrealistic fantasy. He wondered why Lorenzo had brought such a fool as Hazen into their midst. Lorenzo, however, defended Hazen and insisted that they should at least trust him. He explained that the peace agreement with the tribe had only been possible because they had recognized Hazen's strength. Magno dismissed the tribe as nothing more than a savage group. Hazen thought that even in such a critical situation, the lack of decisive action was extremely frustrating. He was also surprised that Magno was in such a worried state. Hazen then asked Magno what he believed a mage was. Magno replied that a mage was simply someone who could use magic. Hazen, however, gave a different definition. He explained that a mage was someone who could turn impossible things into possible ones. In his view, mages were like superheroes. Hazen further warned that if they fled without even fighting, their demotion would be justified and they would be branded as cowards who had never returned to the central command. He then suggested that perhaps Magno trusted Hazen enough to believe that he could become the hero who defended the fortress with only half of the troops. Hazen continued by explaining that soldiers were valuable only when they achieved victory on the battlefield. They had to face their enemies without fear. Hazen then told Magno that he could help him obtain that heroic title and promised that he would grant Magno's wish. As Hazen said this, he gave Magno a frightening look, which left Magno visibly worried. Major Schaimont interrupted and commented that Hazen was really overstepping his boundaries. Magno also stated that he would not listen to the fantasies of a rookie who did not even know his place. Hazen asked Schaimont whether he had any brilliant ideas of his own. He explained that he was only stating the facts and that they were actually very lucky to have such an opportunity. Therefore, he insisted that they should entrust the battle to him, as he was certain that he could lead them to victory. Lorenzo also expressed his trust in Hazen. He requested permission to grant Hazen the necessary authority to handle the situation. Hazen was genuinely surprised to see Lorenzo taking such a stance, especially because Lorenzo was part of the High Command. Hazen explained that, as he had mentioned earlier, everything would be fine as long as the High Command remained concerned with protecting their positions while the lower-ranking soldiers handled the defense. However, once the battle began, everything would be different. Hazen compared himself to a storm that would descend upon the fortress. He believed that he could accomplish in a short period what no one else had been able to do and expose the discord within the fortress as well as the incompetence of the High Command. Hazen intended to become a cruel storm that would completely change the battlefield. Lorenzo had already witnessed all the disgrace within the fortress himself. He believed that even if Hazen's actions resulted in such humiliation, allowing a young man to take the position and handle the battle would not be too great a sacrifice for them. Magno slammed his fist against the table and declared that he would not tolerate failure. He warned that if Hazen lost the battle, he would personally kill him. However, if Hazen succeeded, Magno would have him transferred elsewhere so that he would never set foot in that place again. Magno then ordered Lorenzo to transfer his captain's authority to Hazen. Lorenzo agreed. He informed Hazen that he was transferring his authority to him, and then bowed down, asking Hazen to save the fortress. Hazen accepted the responsibility and agreed to carry out the task. Hazen then began discussing the situation with Lorenzo while showing him the map and explaining how they should proceed. Lorenzo understood that he would now be under Hazen's command, so he wondered what he was supposed to do. Hazen asked him to continue acting as the liaison with the upper ranks, as he did not think the colonels would easily follow his instructions. Lorenzo agreed, but wondered whether that would really be enough. He was certain that Hazen would eventually tell him to use more respectful language. Hazen insisted that Mospiza should use polite speech, although privately, Hazen hoped that he and Lorenzo could continue interacting as they had before. That was why he asked Lorenzo to allow him to continue showing him the proper respect. Lorenzo had never expected to hear such words from Hazen and was surprised by how noble they sounded. Hazen asked him not to tease him, and the two of them continued discussing their strategy. Hazen explained that their first priority was to position the troops properly. The enemy had approximately 50,000 soldiers while they had only 15,000. Therefore, they had no choice but to remain on the defensive. Hazen considered this to be the most solid plan. He intended to lure Gazar into taking action before the situation became even more dangerous. Their opponent was a grand general and was accompanied by a powerful bodyguard force, which was precisely why Hazen was willing to take such a risk. Lorenzo understood that the upper ranks probably would not want to fight Gazar directly, so he believed that Hazen's proposal would most likely be approved. Hazen then added that he needed Lorenzo to take command whenever he was absent. Since Hazen was a mage, his movements could cause some confusion on the battlefield, especially while the enemy remained focused on the fortress. Although Lorenzo held a higher rank than Hazen, he still could not completely understand what Hazen was planning. Hazen realized that Lorenzo still did not completely trust him. However, he considered that to be one of Lorenzo's strengths, because Lorenzo would not make reckless decisions simply because he blindly believed in someone else. Hazen then asked Lorenzo to maintain his position, as they could not know from which direction the enemy might launch an attack. That was why Hazen needed Lorenzo's support for the fortress's defense and for handling the other matters that might arise. Lorenzo was still somewhat uncertain about the plan. Hazen explained that Prince Parody of Biordo already possessed a powerful cavalry force and would most likely target the central gate. Therefore, Leifa would be stationed there to assist Lorenzo. Lorenzo eventually agreed, although Hazen noticed that he still appeared nervous. Hazen then wondered whether Lorenzo understood what he expected from a superior officer. Lorenzo guessed that Hazen was referring to his overall military ability. Hazen denied that this was what he meant. Lorenzo then tried to explain a few more things, but Hazen told him that they were not the top priority at the moment. Those matters were things Lorenzo would have to deal with afterward. Eventually, Lorenzo gave up trying to explain further. Hazen then sincerely stated that the opinions of subordinates should always be considered. If there were excellent ideas among the lower-ranking soldiers, their superiors should make use of them rather than ignoring them. Hazen also made it clear that he was a soldier himself and would show superficial respect when necessary. However, Lorenzo felt that Hazen was not actually behaving that way toward him. Hazen replied that he considered that to be his own shortcoming. He then asked Lorenzo to tell him what his strengths were. Lorenzo understood that Hazen was particularly good at persuading people. The two of them then shook hands, and Lorenzo agreed to help Hazen with the plan. Finally, the day of the battle arrived. Hazen stood ready alongside the other soldiers, and he could easily hear the thunderous roars of the Principality's army approaching the fortress. The soldiers of the Empire appeared terrified. Many of them looked as though they simply did not want to die. Hazen understood their fear, as they were outnumbered by more than 3-1. It was hardly surprising that the entire fortress had been filled with despair and resignation. Hazen wondered what he should do in such a situation. Baz was moving around while leading the soldiers and reminding everyone not to neglect checking their equipment. He also instructed them to make sure they had enough arrows. Baz then looked toward Hazen and thanked him for his hard work. Hazen wondered whether Baz had not fallen into despair. Baz denied it and explained that they had Hazen with them. Hazen knew that the enemy was both stronger and far greater in number, but Baz remained strangely confident. He even admitted that they would probably lose. Hazen stated that he could not guarantee that everyone would survive. Baz remained confident and explained that all the soldiers had already prepared themselves for such a possibility. He reminded Hazen that Hazen had previously told them that if they were prepared to kill someone, they also had to be prepared to be killed themselves. Hazen agreed with him. He then decided to address every soldier in the fortress. Using his magic staff, he amplified his voice so that everyone could hear him clearly. Hazen told the soldiers not to be surprised by his voice and declared that the battle would be decided within 3 days. He also warned that anyone who deserted in front of the enemy would receive the death penalty. He knew that some of the soldiers were frightened, but he promised that at least half of them would survive. He further assured them that they would drive back the Principality's army and rescue everyone from their seemingly hopeless situation. Hazen's speech was intended to raise the soldiers' morale. He encouraged them to raise their voices and respond with a battle cry. The soldiers immediately roared as loudly as they could. Even Rafa was surprised by how loudly Hazen had shouted. Hazen understood that he had to raise the morale of the soldiers. Other than Lorenzo, he did not intend to place much trust in the officers. However, he had also done something that was somewhat out of character for him because there were a few people whom he genuinely did not want to see die. Raifa realized that Hazen was not being completely honest about his intentions. Hazen then left the rest of the situation to Raifa and jumped down. Raifa became confused and wondered where Hazen was going. Hazen explained that even a bad commander could hold out for a day when the soldiers had such high morale. He also trusted Lorenzo to do an even better job of defending the fortress. As for himself, he intended to do what only he could do. By the time Raifa realized what had happened, Hazen had already left. She felt sorry for the captain who had been entrusted with leading them. Meanwhile, Lanbru informed Gizar that all the troops had already taken their positions and were prepared to break through the center of the fortress. Gizar became excited at the prospect of the massive battle. The Empire had caused them their fair share of trauma in the past, and now they believed it was finally time for revenge. The soldiers were filled with excitement and their confidence was extremely high. They were finally preparing to charge when, all of a sudden, they heard a tremendous roar from the fortress. The unexpected roar frightened many of the Principality soldiers. Gizar was surprised that the Empire's soldiers seemed to have such high morale, despite having a force 3 times smaller than his own. He wondered whether this was the skill Hazen possessed, which Mospitza had mentioned earlier. Lanbru asked whether they should switch to a long-term strategy. Gizar, however, believed that this would be a short-term battle and decided to go all out from the very beginning. He reasoned that the Empire was probably waiting for them to lose their momentum. With the war god on their side, they might even be able to overturn their numerical disadvantage. If the Empire began to see hope in simply enduring the battle, then a half-hearted attack would only backfire on Gizar's forces. Therefore, Gizar decided that they would unleash everything they had and crush the Empire as quickly as possible. The horses and soldiers of the Principality then rushed toward the Imperial fortress. Their archers also began firing, creating what appeared to be a rain of arrows descending upon the fortress. Hazen watched the scene from high in the sky. He realized that suffering losses from arrows while possessing such a small force would be extremely painful for the Empire. He also understood that in the chaos of battle, the easiest way to distinguish friend from foe was by their clothing and flags. Hazen therefore killed one of the enemy soldiers, took his clothing, and changed his appearance. He then observed the equipment of the Principality and concluded that it was not bad at all. Meanwhile, the corps commander, Konohavan, was ordering his soldiers not to panic. He instructed the archers to continue firing and repeatedly reminded them to make sure they had enough arrows. Hazen secretly approached their position. He decided that eliminating the leader of the archers would be enough to create confusion among them. Hazen infiltrated the area and assassinated Konohavan. The soldiers were shocked by the sudden death of their commander. The resulting commotion spread through the archer units. Hazen took advantage of the confusion and decided to start a few fires around the area. He believed that this would be enough to cause additional chaos. Soon afterward, a soldier rushed to Lorenzo and reported that the archer offensive had begun weakening. Lorenzo was pleased because he immediately understood that Hazen was responsible. He ordered the soldiers to continue fighting in the same manner until the sun went down. Both armies continued fighting with everything they had. Gizar watched the battlefield carefully and began wondering whether they had reached a stalemate or whether his forces were actually at a slight disadvantage. Lanbru asked whether they should send out their commanders, as he was unsure what else they could do. Gizar was worried about the situation. He understood that the battle could ultimately become a duel between mages, which could completely turn the tide of the battle. However, such a situation was also unpredictable. He wondered whether there was any prominent mage on the battlefield. Lanbru explained that it was not a mage who had caught his attention. Instead, there was a warrior standing beside Lorenzo who was extremely unusual. She had been striking down multiple soldiers with a single arrow. Gizar was surprised by her strength. He also found himself captivated by Raifa's beauty. Suddenly, a group of soldiers arrived and reported that the archer commander had been assassinated. The report left everyone confused. Konohavan had apparently offered almost no resistance against the attack, which suggested that the assassin had deliberately targeted a weakness. Gizar wondered whether Hazen was responsible. If Hazen had really been behind the assassination, it meant that he was an assassin-type mage rather than someone suited for direct group combat. Eventually, the sun began to set. After a long day of fighting, it was time for the Principality's army to withdraw. Gizar ordered the messenger to instruct all units to retreat for the day. He believed that the assassination had revealed something important. Hazen appeared to be better suited to operating independently, rather than participating in large-scale group battles. Gazar also understood that there was little they could accomplish by continuing the assault at that moment. If they withdrew, reorganized their forces, and strengthened their strategy, they could resume the attack under better conditions. He believed that by the following day they would be able to unleash their full strength. Gazar then called Nidel with a smirk. Nidel immediately understood what Gazar meant and assured him that he would leave the matter to him. He also admitted that he was extremely curious and was looking forward to seeing what would happen next. Hazen got to meet Lorenzo, who wondered whether Hazen was the one who had killed the leader of the archers. He thanked Hazen for helping them finally hold out, although he could not understand how Hazen had managed to accomplish such a feat. Hazen explained that it had been because of the soldiers' high morale. He had easily passed through the enemy lines by pretending to be one of them, which had allowed him to avoid unnecessary killing. Lorenzo nodded and commented that nothing was easy within enemy territory, and that Hazen was truly terrifying, to be able to say such things so casually. Hazen replied that the battlefront would move forward with Gazar as well. Lorenzo then wondered whether the general would still be there by the next day and asked if Hazen intended to face him. Hazen explained that the general had only been a decoy and that he would leave the general to Lorenzo by the following day. Lorenzo looked surprised and seemed somewhat nervous, but he agreed that he would do his best. Hazen excused himself and told Lorenzo to get some rest during the night. Hazen then looked toward the soldiers and found that there were fewer injuries than they had expected, which he considered extremely fortunate. However, he noticed Baz and wondered whether those were all the injured soldiers. Baz denied it and explained that there were more injured soldiers. Hazen immediately asked him to gather all of them because he intended to heal as many soldiers as possible. Baz hesitated because Hazen's magical power would decrease if he used too much of it. He also mentioned that Hazen had not slept at all and had been continuously keeping watch. Hazen replied that he would simply conserve his magical power and that besides, he was their superior officer. Therefore, he believed that his duty was to do more than his subordinates. Hazen then checked something, which made Baz comment that he had never heard such words from someone like Hazen before. Baz also pointed out that Hazen was paid more than the others. Hazen agreed that it was true, but he explained that some superiors mistakenly believed that merely giving orders and encouraging their subordinates was their entire job. He felt that blaming people for lacking ability or effort while refusing to do anything themselves only made such superiors look foolish. Baz understood that Hazen always said terrifying things so casually while behaving like a very relaxed person. Hazen advised Baz that he would not be there forever. He then returned to the matter at hand and added that he was simply doing what was expected of him as a superior officer. Baz saluted Hazen and commented that he truly admired him. Hazen told Baz that he should not admire him and should instead simply do what was required of him as a subordinate. He explained that if everyone did what they were supposed to do, the army would surely produce good results. Even after hearing this, Baz still admired Hazen because it was extremely rare to find someone like him. That was why he respected Hazen so much. Hazen told him to do as he pleased. Finally, the next day arrived. Hazen's enemies moved toward the west alongside Gazar, while Leifa was also present. Hazen was counting on Leifa to crush the central cavalry unit. Nidel advanced toward the front with his army, which frightened Hazen's soldiers. Hazen realized that Nidel's army was much stronger than expected. The infantry leader had also joined the cavalry, so it was no wonder that they were struggling. Hazen used the ground fury staff, which could control gravity within a certain range. Its power disrupted the formation of the cavalry soldiers, causing them to lose their balance and fall. As the cavalrymen fell, they noticed Hazen. At the same time, a rain of arrows was about to descend upon Nidel's cavalry army. Nidel immediately ordered his soldiers to retreat, realizing that Hazen was far beyond their level. Nidel then looked toward Hazen and wondered whether the person standing before him really was Hazen. Hazen used the staff's power to jump down toward them. Nidel commented that he had heard Hazen could wield multiple staffs and wanted to confirm whether the rumor was true before they fought. Nidel then brought up the events of the previous day and asked whether Hazen had really been the one who killed Kona Havan. Hazen confirmed that he had done so. He explained that several excellent archers had been in his way and he had been forced to take Kona Havan down in order to disrupt their formation. Nidel became furious upon hearing this. A clear intent to kill appeared in his eyes as he stated that Hazen had killed his best friend and had now given him yet another reason to kill him. Hazen used his power to send a large number of swords flying toward Hazen. Hazen understood that Nidel was using Needle, a superior version of telekinesis. It was an impressive ability because Nidel could control a very large number of weapons at once. However, Hazen easily dodged every sword that came toward him. He commented that it was not simply some convenient ability that allowed him to do so, but rather the result of his ingenuity and continuous improvement. Hazen knew that the magic wand allowed him to fly easily, but he also realized that simply flying would not be enough. The actual realization of the technique remained difficult. By using the floating feather to reduce his weight to almost zero, he could leap into the air and then use the wind rover, a wand that generated wind, to ride the current for a while. Nadel ordered his weapons to pursue Hazen endlessly. However, Hazen finally used the wind rover to destroy all of them with ease. Nadel then unleashed even more of his power and created a gigantic rock, sending it toward Hazen. Hazen immediately understood that the wind rover would obviously not be enough to deal with such an attack. Therefore, he used Steel Slash to cut the enormous rock into two pieces. He explained that Steel Slash was a magic wand specialized in cutting through matter, and that it was perfectly capable of cutting through something like that. Hazen then asked Nadel whether he had any other moves left. If he did not, Hazen suggested that they could consider the battle a checkmate. Hazen then used Permafrost Horizon, causing Nadel to suddenly feel an extremely strange and intense cold surrounding him. Hazen then snapped his fingers while using his magic wand to modify Kosaku, a member of the human tribe, for battle. Nadel wanted to understand what Hazen was doing and challenged him to use his maximum output. The battle continued while Hazen fought alone against such a large number of soldiers. Suddenly, Nadel realized that one of his arms had already been cut off. He screamed in shock and called Hazen a monster, especially because Hazen had remained completely unscratched despite everything Nadel had thrown at him. Hazen heard Nadel declare that he would not be defeated by Gizar because Gizar was extremely strong. Hazen replied that he was looking forward to seeing that battle. Nadel then told Hazen that he would wait for him in the depths of hell. Hazen finally delivered a slash that cut off Nadel's head. After defeating him, Hazen immediately ordered his army to charge forward, informing them that the enemy leader had already been taken down. However, Hazen was extremely exhausted from using so much magic. As he began to lose his balance and fall, Baz rushed over and caught him. Baz assured him that they would surely win. Hazen denied it, explaining that the outcome would depend on what happened at the West Gate. The scene then shifted to the West Gate, where Captain Makazalu and Buiz were extremely overconfident. They believed that they could easily wipe out the enemy because their numbers were roughly equal. Shimant was also remaining quite relaxed about the situation. Suddenly, Lorenzo Drew arrived and informed them that they had been demoted. He also mentioned that Hazen had apparently removed Lorenzo from his previous position and that Lorenzo had been assigned to support the area instead. One of the officers immediately shouted that they did not need a disgrace to the officers and told Lorenzo to stop spouting such nonsense. Lorenzo Drew became angry upon hearing this, while the other three began laughing at him. Lorenzo thought that although Hazen had entrusted him with the West Gate, he still did not know what he should do, especially since their forces were nearly equal in number. The other two, however, seemed to be enjoying themselves and were confident about the situation. Rafa arrived while cracking her knuckles like a strong WWE fighter. She confidently announced that she was ready and asked Lorenzo to give her the signal whenever they should begin. Lorenzo thanked her but told her that they should first observe the situation carefully before taking action. Meanwhile, Gizar and the others rushed forward and Gizar eventually came to the front. He shouted toward the Imperial cohorts who had taken shelter inside the fortress and challenged them to come out and fight him. Gizar declared that if they could defeat him, the battle would surely come to an end, and they would all receive great glory for defeating him. Yahello became furious upon hearing Gizar's challenge, while the others were also angered by his words. Lorenzo asked them to calm down and reminded them that they had been ordered to avoid single combat. However, Shimant suddenly became angry with Lorenzo and warned him to know his place. His words implied that Lorenzo was merely a captain and had no authority to interfere with their decision. Shimant and the others then decided to move forward, determined to defeat Gizar and secure victory for the Empire. Kazalu stepped forward to face Gizar in a duel. He introduced himself and suggested that they settle the matter through single combat. Gizar agreed to the duel, and his Thundercutter Peacock seemed to become excited at the prospect of the battle. Lorenzo Duke thought about Gizar's magic staff. He understood that it had been created by artisans who were considered masters of their craft, which was why it had been given such a prestigious name. The staff was truly powerful, making Lorenzo wonder how Makazalu could possibly fight against Gizar. Makazalu attacked first with Yellow Rock Surge. However, the moment he took out his weapon, his head had already been cut off by Gizar. Gizar casually asked whether Makazalu was ready to begin the fight. Everyone was left completely shocked. Lorenzo asked Rafa whether she had seen what had happened. Rafa admitted that she had not even been able to follow Gizar's movements. They soon realized that Gazar had moved at lightning speed. Before anyone could even understand what had happened, he had already defeated his first opponent with ease. Gazar appeared excited and wondered who would be the next person to battle him. He then threw Makazalu's severed head toward the other two commanders, terrifying them. Buiz immediately ordered the troops to attack Gazar. Gazar appeared annoyed by this, feeling that they were underestimating him. Lorenzo moved forward and noticed that Buiz was trying to run away. He questioned where Buiz was going. Buiz explained that he had only come there because he had heard that Hazen would deal with Gazar by himself. He admitted that he was frightened and was now trying to run for his life. The soldiers attempted to attack Gazar, but he dealt with them effortlessly. Suddenly, Gazar disappeared from their sight and reappeared right next to Buiz. Gazar condemned Buiz as a disgraceful man for using his own subordinates as bait while trying to escape and save his own life. Buiz then realized that Gazar had already cut off one of his legs and began screaming in agony. He desperately begged Gazar to spare his life. Buiz also pleaded that under his authority, he would open the west gate and allow Gazar's forces to enter. Although Gazar acknowledged that opening the gate would be useful, he still felt disgust toward Buiz. He stated that someone like him deserved to be killed. After that, Shimant began retreating from the battlefield. While running toward the gate, he ordered the guards to open it, declaring that it was his command. The guards inside the fortress were surprised when they heard Shimant's voice. However, Lorenzo immediately intervened and ordered the soldiers not to open the gate. He warned them that doing so would allow the enemy forces to flood into the fortress. Lorenzo also tried to calm Shimant down, but Shimant refused to listen. He continued demanding that the gate be opened immediately. Meanwhile, Gazar watched the situation carefully and sent a signal into the sky, commenting that it was the perfect opportunity. Landbrew saw the signal and immediately ordered his troops to advance. Lorenzo realized that the situation had become extremely dangerous. The soldiers were paralyzed with fear, while even Shimant appeared frightened. Lorenzo could no longer understand what he should do. Finally, Raifa stepped forward and tried to reassure Lorenzo. She told him not to worry and assured him that everything would be fine if he left the situation to her. Raifa then brought out the demon armor and the raging bone sword. She prepared to unleash their full potential, covering herself completely in magical armor as she got ready for battle. Gazar was surprised when he saw Raifa's magic staff. Just as his army was preparing to advance, Raifa moved forward and attacked them, leaving the soldiers shocked as she bombarded the heavily armored troops. Lorenzo was also surprised to learn that Gazar's army had such powerful soldiers with them. He understood that these troops were said to be comparable to Goro's forces and that they were being deployed without any hesitation. The heavily armored soldiers were equipped with reinforced armor made from madamada steel. Raifa went on a rampage, striking down the soldiers one after another. Gazar was surprised and could not understand what kind of magic staff Raifa was using, especially since it had transformed into armor around her body. Raifa continued her assault and cut through multiple armored soldiers with a single slash. Lorenzo was also astonished by the fighting style she displayed. Shimant suddenly became confident upon seeing the scene and praised Raifa's performance, expressing amazement that they had such an outrageous hidden trump card. He also encouraged Raifa to continue fighting until her last breath. Lorenzo was about to respond, but one of the others interrupted and declared that their victory was already assured. Lorenzo explained that Raifa was currently the only remaining strength protecting the west gate and warned them not to push her too hard. Shimant became furious and shouted at Lorenzo to stop talking. Lorenzo became increasingly irritated with Shimant, thinking that he was being extremely foolish. He wondered whether this was actually part of Hazen's plan and whether Hazen intended to have them killed by Gazar. Meanwhile, Gazar jumped high into the air and stated that he could not afford to lose his troops. He then prepared to strike Raifa. Raifa reacted quickly, turning aside to dodge the attack before blocking it. Gazar became even more excited by the encounter, realizing that Raifa was capable of giving him an interesting battle. Raifa was standing in front of Gazar when Shimant became extremely excited and pointed her out to Lorenzo, saying that Gazar was not a big deal for them and that this might even be the end of him. Gazar became annoyed and attacked Raifa with everything he had. He also used the dancing peacock technique. Afterward, he warned Raifa not to move anymore and showed his hand, claiming that the western gate would be defeated. However, he suddenly noticed that Raifa was roaring at that moment. This made Shimant even more excited, as he commented that it was the Empire's weaponry and urged them to kill Gazar. Lorenzo also turned toward Raifa and reassured her that everything was fine, as the Dutch forces were retreating because night had fallen. Finally, Hazen arrived and asked Lorenzo to step back. Hazen then used liberation to lift Raifa into his arms. He praised her for defending everything so well and said that without her, the fortress would certainly have fallen. He also acknowledged that she had worked 100 times harder than usual and implied that she should eat accordingly. Raifa was happy because she felt that she had finally managed to accomplish everything she had wanted to do. Hazen looked at her injuries and realized that they were much worse than he had expected. The situation had developed much faster than he had anticipated, which was why he had arrived late. He then ordered the soldiers to bring a stretcher. The people around them were frightened and hesitated to approach Raifa because they feared that they might be killed if they got too close to her. Hazen became angry at their behavior and questioned how they could possibly repay the person who had saved them if they were too afraid to even approach her. Lorenzo came forward to help Hazen, but Hazen told him that the captain still had to attend a strategy meeting with him afterward. He then urged the soldiers to hurry and warned them not to make him angry. Hazen gave the soldiers a terrifying death stare, which finally made them bring the stretcher and carry Raifa away. After that, Hazen spoke with Baz Hotel. He explained that he was heading toward the western gate and had already received reports that the situation there was extremely dire. Lorenzo apologized to Hazen and explained that after witnessing Raifa's fighting style, the soldiers must have been frightened. He pointed out that the person who had saved them from Gizar and his army had been none other than Raifa, and that not everyone could be as powerful as Hazen. Hazen did not accept that explanation. He thought that even a dog would not forget someone who had given it food and a place to sleep. He appeared extremely angry and began speaking to the soldiers there. He reminded them that all of them must have families and asked them to imagine how they would feel if their own families called them monsters after everything they had done. He urged them to think carefully about the situation before leaving the place. Hazen then went inside to meet Shimant, who was behaving unusually well and even called Hazen a monster, saying that his strength was extremely useful and that they were looking forward to having him fight for them. Hazen commented that it was terrible of them to call Raifa a monster. Shimant told him not to underestimate the situation. He explained that it had been thanks to the strength of the 1st and 3rd battalions that they had managed to drive Gizar back, and that this was what he intended to report to the colonel. Hazen then suggested that in that case, their unit should handle the defense on its own from the following day. He also made it clear that he was not going to deploy Raifa there anymore. Shimant became angry and reminded Hazen that it was a direct order from their superior. He warned that defying a direct order was extremely serious and could result in immediate execution. Hazen simply asked to be allowed to do as they pleased. He wondered whether there was something wrong with his decision and told Shimant to hurry and report the matter to Colonel Magno. He also pointed out that Shimant and the others had insulted his subordinate, Raifa, and that he would no longer allow them to use her. Shimant then fell into his own trap. He admitted that they could not stop using Raifa because otherwise the Empire would suffer heavy losses and many soldiers and officers would die. Hazen pointed out that this was not helping their situation at all. Shimant shouted that Hazen was wrong and desperately asked him to allow them to use Raifa. Hazen questioned whether that was really how they were supposed to ask someone for a favor. He then gestured for Shimant to lower his head. Shimant could not understand what had happened to Hazen and wondered whether he had completely lost his mind. Hazen told him that he wanted to see some sincerity from Shimant and asked him to show it. Eventually, Shimant gave in. He lowered himself and begged Hazen to allow them to use Raifa in the battle the following day. Hazen initially appeared to agree, but then refused. He said that if they wanted to use Raifa, they should bring the Emperor there and make him bow his head before them. He made it clear that this was the kind of respect he expected before they could ask for Raifa's help. Lorenzo was shocked by how rude Hazen was being. He called Hazen a pig and warned him to choose his actions carefully. He pointed out that they had two choices. Either they could kill Hazen for his insubordination and allow Gizar to slaughter them all, or they could turn a blind eye to Hazen's indignation and use his power so that everyone could survive. Shimant did not think the situation was right, but he eventually had to agree. He asked Hazen to protect them no matter what. Hazen became pleased when they finally admitted that they were relying on the power of an insubordinate person for their own safety and benefit. Shimant explained that he was doing everything for the sake of the Empire. Hazen also told Shimant that he was not the kind of person Shimant was, and that he only cared about his own life. Lorenzo became furious and punched Hazen, telling him that enough was enough and that Hazen had gone too far. Shimant took advantage of the situation and quickly left, saying that he was going to report everything that had happened and that Hazen would have to pay for his actions. Hazen was then taken to the infirmary. Lorenzo apologized for having raised his hand against Hazen, but Hazen thanked him, saying that because of the punch, he had managed to calm his head down. Lorenzo commented that Hazen had not been like this earlier. Hazen was sitting beside the bed where Raifa was being treated. She was lying down, and Hazen felt relieved after confirming that she was not going to die. As he looked at her, he remembered that a long time ago someone had risked their life and sacrificed their entire being and soul to save the person Hazen loved. At that time, Hazen had called that person a monster. Lorenzo was confused as Hazen explained that the person he had been talking about had deeply cared for the one they loved. However, their obsession with saving that person's life had become so extreme that they had committed a forbidden act and ceased to be human. The only way to stop them had been to bring them down. Hazen explained that he had been faced with a power far beyond his own, which was why he had called that person a monster. He had felt that he had no other choice but to stop them, otherwise he would have died, and perhaps he would have regretted it forever. However, that regret had remained with him for the rest of his life, as Hazen could never forgive himself for calling someone a monster when that person had only been trying to save someone else. The memory reminded Hazen of Raifa. Although he had only been stationed at the fortress for a short time and had barely interacted with most of the soldiers, he could not stand seeing Raifa being called a monster after she had saved all of them. Lorenzo silently listened to the entire story and somehow came to understand what Hazen was trying to say. He admitted that Hazen's explanation sounded like nonsense, but he still asked Lorenzo to simply follow his wishes. Lorenzo replied that it was hardly nonsense and pointed out that Hazen was also a human being who had feelings. After that, Hazen went to meet the soldiers of the 1st and 3rd battalions. He noticed that they were trying to show Raifa the respect she deserved, especially because she had saved all of them. Hazen understood their feelings and ordered them to go and eat and get some rest. When they tried to protest, Hazen reminded them that there was nothing they could do at that moment. Raifa would not be able to move for at least a month, and there was no one else available to fight in their place. The soldiers agreed confidently and assured Hazen that they would definitely be ready to fight by the following day. Hazen then told them that Raifa would be happy to know how they felt about her. He added that if they were lucky enough to survive the next battle, they should bring Raifa a meal as a token of their gratitude, as she would surely appreciate it. The soldiers agreed with him. Afterward, Hazen went inside his room. Lorenzo tried to reassure him that being a soldier was not such a bad thing after all. Hazen commented that it was good to see that the soldiers' morale had not fallen. He felt confident that by the following day they would be ready to defend the fortress against Gizar once again. The next day, the scene shifted to the central gate, where Hazen was standing directly in front of Gizar. There was no one else between them. Hazen greeted Gizar, and the two exchanged formal greetings. Hazen then suggested that if Gizar did not mind, they should make a wager. He proposed that if Hazen won, would have to become his subordinate. Gizar was surprised upon hearing such a strange proposal. He could hardly believe that Hazen had suggested something like that. Upon hearing this, Gizar wondered whether the same opposite outcome would occur if he won the battle. Hazen agreed, and Gizar felt that Hazen seemed extremely confident. Hazen clarified that it was not confidence but certainty. Finally, the battle between the two began. Hazen found Gizar striking and jumping high into the sky, and even he trembled at the sight. Gizar commented that it was a difficult attack, but it turned out that his ability truly possessed enough power to wipe out his opponent. Hazen agreed and acknowledged that the greatest advantage was the ability to adapt to one's opponent. Gizar's staff was known as the Thunder Cutter Peacock, and it was a magnificent weapon. There was no wonder that it had been powerful enough to destroy Raifa's demon armor. Hazen wondered why Gizar would show off his overwhelming speed against her with just a single staff. He decided that they should fairly demonstrate the difference between their abilities. Gizar seemed somewhat excited and changed his attitude, as though he had decided that if Hazen were his opponent, he would have beheaded her. However, at the very least, he wanted to hear Hazen's name. Hazen's ability was known as Magnetic Flash, and it was said that such a magic skill could overpower the Thunder Peacock. Finally, Gizar rushed toward Hazen to strike. However, he suddenly found that Hazen had teleported to a different location. Gizar immediately understood that he was using Swift Thunder, an ability that allowed its user to move toward a target at an ultra-high speed while simultaneously enhancing the body enough to withstand the tremendous force generated by that speed. Gizar could not understand what was happening. Before he could react, Hazen appeared behind him and lightly tapped him, pointing out that he was being too slow. When Gizar turned around, Hazen was already standing some distance away. Gizar realized that he was lacking in movement speed, but the activation speed of magic was different, allowing Hazen to process and execute her movements much faster. Hazen agreed with his observation but still wondered whether Gazar was unwilling to admit defeat. Gazar admitted that no matter how great the difference in their abilities was, the person who remained standing at the end would still be the winner. He decided to allocate all of the Thunder Cutter's body management ability to his vision so that he could keep up with Hazen and force him to struggle for a little longer. Hazen understood that Gazar was specializing in his vision and had adopted a highly adaptable strategy. This made her grow even more fond of him as an opponent. Hazen then decided to use his own power and created multiple copies of himself, leaving Gazar completely speechless. It was almost like the awkward silence during a first date with a girlfriend, when one could barely manage to say anything. Gazar could not understand what was happening because until that point, Hazen had only demonstrated horizontal movements. He realized that he had deliberately made him believe that her movement was limited in that way, using it as a bluff. He also noticed that Hazen was leaving marks behind him as he moved. Before he could fully understand her technique, Hazen used her staff to slash at him and smash him into the ground. Hazen moved extremely close to him, and Gazar finally accepted his defeat. After the battle ended, Hazen lay down as well, completely exhausted. He remarked that Gizar now belonged to Hazen. Gazar accepted the result, acknowledging that he had suffered a complete defeat. After some time, he also commented that the Principality's advance was not going to stop. They had not been at the fortress for very long, and their morale had not dropped at all. Hazen commented that he was going to stop a few of them. Meanwhile, a person accompanying Lanbrew witnessed what had happened and was shocked to see that Gizar had actually been defeated. Lanbrew explained that even though the general had been defeated, their orders were still to continue advancing. Just then, another person arrived with an urgent report stating that they needed to return to the fortress immediately because the Kuman tribe had invaded. Basia watched the situation and commented that the entire development was anticlimactic and that she was already feeling bored. As another person arrived, Basia used her power to freeze all of them, leaving everyone surprised. They reminded her that they had a ceasefire agreement with the tribe, and if the tribe sided with them, it would essentially mean that they were taking the side of the empire. Basia told them not to misunderstand the situation, explaining that the tribe had only attacked because the fortress had happened to be left vulnerable. Lanbrew was furious upon hearing this, realizing that they were now going to be destroyed. Basia's white dragon arrived as well. Basia told them to surrender peacefully and promised that everyone who had been frozen would be spared. She then asked them what they intended to do. The flag was raised once again, and Hazen and the others soon learned that the Principality's army was withdrawing. Hazen told Gazar that he would be captured as a prisoner but would later be allowed to escape. Before that happened, however, a magical master-servant contract was presented. Gazar wondered whether Hazen intended to make him join the Imperial Army as her subordinate. Hazen clarified that Gazar had no desire to serve the Empire and that he had only become an Imperial soldier for his own personal goals. Hazen also explained that if Gazar officially defected to the Empire, it would become more difficult for him to move freely according to her commands. Gazar understood that Hazen was the one who had leaked the information to Mosbiza and had been orchestrating the entire plan from behind the scenes. He estimated that Hazen was probably around 20 years old, yet her abilities were far beyond what someone of that age should possess. This made Gazar wonder how old Hazen really was. Hazen stood up and advised Gazar not to try to figure her out, warning him that he would surely regret it if he did. Gazar accepted her advice and finally signed the magical master-servant contract with Hazen. By the next day, the victory celebration had begun and everyone was enjoying themselves. Magna was also present at the party, where he wondered about bringing the Empire under Hazen's control. Shimant agreed with the idea, adding that he had devoted his entire life to the Emperor's will and could not simply endure such humiliation. Magna laughed upon hearing this, but Shimant pointed out that it was not something to laugh about. Magna apologized, explaining that he had not been laughing at Shimant but at the situation itself. However, Magna emphasized that Hazen's crime was undeniable and that, regardless of whatever accomplishments Hazen might have achieved, the death penalty was certain. He also explained that the faction had fallen from grace because of their unauthorized desertion in front of the enemy. According to him, that was simply their fate, and it was the perfect opportunity for them to disappear. Shimant became excited upon hearing this and said that Hazen would probably have to grovel and apologize, perhaps giving them a chance to consider forgiving him. However, Magna made it clear that they would never allow such a thing to happen. Shimant agreed, acknowledging that Hazen had to receive punishment for what he had done. Meanwhile, Hazen, Meat, Sapura, and Yan were happily enjoying the celebration. They remarked that it would not be a real celebration without the guest of honor. Yan began showing Hazen all the delicious food that had been prepared while wondering whether something was wrong with her. Hazen appeared unusually sad and quietly assured her that nothing was wrong. Mospisa was secretly sneaking into a certain place and managed to help Gazar escape. His plan was to make it appear as though Hazen had allowed a prisoner to escape. However, Lorenzo suddenly arrived there together with Hazen and wondered what Mospisa was doing in that place. Mospisa was surprised to see Lorenzo. Lorenzo noticed the key and realized that Gazar had already escaped. He immediately suspected that Mospisa had helped him get out. Mospisa tried to explain the situation, but Lorenzo quickly understood that Mospisa was actually a spy working for the principality and had been leaking information to them. Lorenzo decided that they should report the matter to their superiors. He then asked Hazen to apprehend Mospisa and locate Gazar. Lorenzo left the area, leaving Mospisa alone with Hazen. Mospisa became extremely frightened and warned Hazen that he would be finished, regardless of how well he had defended the fortress. Hazen laughed at his concern and explained that Mospisa had actually saved her. If he had not noticed what was happening, Hazen would have allowed Gizar to escape on her own. Mospisa could not understand what Hazen meant by that excuse. Hazen then made it clear that he was not foolish enough to overlook Mospisa's movements, and that he already knew about all the information he had been secretly leaking. Gazar then appeared from behind. Hazen told him that he could leave through the Western Blue Supply Station. Gazar agreed and thanked Hazen for helping him. Mospisa was completely unable to understand what was happening. Hazen grabbed him by the head and pointed out how lucky he was because, as a high-ranking noble, he would not be executed. Mospisa became terrified of Hazen. Hazen then wondered whether he truly wished to live a fulfilling life at the bottom of society as a slave. Gazar was also frightened by the situation, and suddenly, a huge scream echoed through the area. Afterward, the soldiers who had been killed in the battle were buried with proper respect. The survivors also apologized to Rafa, and everything proceeded smoothly. Later, Hazen met Magna and Lorenzo. Magna explained that the Principality's army had been defeated, the opposing faction had been eliminated, and their victory had finally been secured. It was now a fresh morning, and the situation appeared to be moving toward a peaceful resolution. However, there was one unfortunate development. Hazen had been placed under house arrest on charges of lèse-majesty.